Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to this Homes First Social Housing White Paper seminar. Good morning to you all. Thanks very much for joining us. I know some people are still in the lobby and on the way in. Look forward to hearing from you. My name's Eamon McGoldrick. I have the pleasure of chairing this morning's event, and just a little bit of background. I'll say I've been in housing a long time, 45 years coming up. Most of it, nearly all of it, spent in local authority and the ALMO sectors. I'm currently a housing consultant, and main day job at the moment is managing director of the National Federation of ALMOs. So I'm really looking forward to today. And just for the first few minutes, I was going to open up with a combination of some housekeeping bits, a quick run through the agenda, and then just a few thoughts from myself to set the context, I think, for the morning. Before we start to introduce the individual speakers. So first of all, just by way of background, we've been very ably assisted this morning by David Bradshaw, who's in the background looking after all the IT and tech stuff for us. So thank you in advance, David, for what you've done to set us up, and to Richard Tompkinson for organising and facilitating today. So a few housekeeping bits. Everybody's cameras and microphones will be muted to help with the bandwidth and to help us avoid interference. I would ask the speakers to just put their cameras and mics on about a minute before they come on to help with that. When it comes to questions, what we would ask you to do is to try and keep the questions for example, the regulator session, the data session, or the resident engagement session for Jenny and Jonathan, Angela and Kate, to those sessions. We will have a big wash up and a roundup at the end, but while you've got those expert speakers, if you want to direct a question to them specifically, please get the question in within that session, because they may not be with us the whole of the morning. There is also the raised hand option on your top toolbar. You should be able to see the raised hand option. So when it comes to taking questions, then please use the raised hand. I'll try and pick up questions from the raised hands, but you can also use the chat function where it says show conversation. It's just up there next to the raised hand option. Post your questions in there. If you like a question, please endorse it, because that will move it up the ranks, and it means we'll be able to get maximum opportunity to hear answers from our speakers. On the agenda, this morning we start off with a session from the regulator. We'll then be hearing around data from Jonathan Housemark, and after the break, Jenny on resident engagement. But there will also be a poll at the end. We will just ask you to give us some feedback on the whole session, because we do want to hear about how it all went for yourselves. The roundup session as well will very much about looking forward. I will be asking particular stakeholders and partners from Osbourne and Lewis to chip in and help with that very important laying out of the steps ahead. So I would say the aims of this morning's session are to bring you up to speed with the current housing policy landscape. It's moving quite fast. Even during the pandemic, there was a lot of work being done behind the scenes, and I'll try and give you a summary of that in a moment. Secondly, you will be hearing from some expert speakers in their field, and hopefully what you'll do is pick up something that hopefully you need to know, something educational, but also give you some thought for the world ahead. I think thirdly, as always, it's often not said, but you will learn from each other, both the posing of the questions, the answers, the sharing, the networking will hopefully be a benefit from this morning's session. And I think finally, hopefully you'll take something back to the office or the day job from today, which you'll be able to put in place and get yourselves ready for the new world ahead. Because for us in housing, it's going to be significantly different, I think, in another couple of years' time. So before we go into the main programme, as I said, I just wanted to just say a few words to set the scene for today. And I think we all knew that after the terrible tragedy at Grenfell Tower, that there were going to be significant changes in the way that landlords delivered services were to be regulated, how we were going to respond to residents and listen in particular to the complaints that were made by the Grenfell Tower residents. And there's some really big bricks in the wall at the moment. The first one, of course, is the public inquiry. It's still running. It started up again last week. It's already posted some early recommendations, which have resulted in potential changes to the fire safety order. For example, more regular inspections of fire doors or front doors and communal doors, and the possibility of personal emergency evacuation plans, or PEEPs, for certain types of high-rise properties. Secondly, we've had the establishment of the new building safety regulator, currently posted alongside the HSE, and Peter Baker is now beginning to open up and tell us what that world of regulation for buildings over 18 metres will look like in the future. We've got a building safety bill which is currently in the Lords and not too far away from Royal Assent, which will also put the regulator in place and introduce some other legislative changes in how buildings are managed to make sure they're safe from fire. We have a better resourced and more empowered housing ombudsman. Richard Blakeway, over the last couple of years, has published a complaints handling code, has started to be much more transparent about their work, making it much more accessible for residents. We're seeing a lot more judgments from the Ombudsman Service in terms of maladministration and severe maladministration being much more public, and I think we can expect to see more of that in the future. And of course, just over a year ago, we had the publication of the long-awaited Social Housing White Paper, which is the primary topic for today's session. And I've been very impressed with everybody in government and the civil service about, say, the work that was going on even during the pandemic on, for example, some of the following areas that you may not be fully aware of. The white paper talked about, for example, a review of the Decent Homes Standard. That's going to be a two-phase review. The first year of work has been completed and we're waiting to hear whether or not we'll move on to phase two. Phase one was about whether or not the standard needed to be reviewed or not. I'm just speculating, but I guess the answer will be yes. And this year we will move on to what that will look like. And a number of commentators are saying that the standard will be reviewed to include things like building safety, but also the zero carbon agenda going forward. We've had an electrical safety working group with civil servants and ministers looking at equalising and levelling up the standards across the private rented sector and the social rented sector. So don't be surprised if we see mandatory electrical testing every 5 years for social rented properties and portable appliance testing for equipment that is owned by the landlord or provided by the landlord. We've also got some new regulations coming around carbon monoxide and smoke alarms, which are probably going to come into play this year, which will require social landlords to have those available in all of their properties. Again, this will bring the social rented sector into line with the private rented sector, where that's already a requirement. And just a couple of weeks ago, we started off a professionalisation working group. So the Department of Levelling Up Homes and Communities has got a year's work ahead. We have a number of meetings set for the year ahead to look at what needs to be done in terms of training, qualifications, professionalisation, changing culture, customer service approach in the housing sector. And interestingly, on that working group is Ed Daffern from Grenfell United. And he's very clear that we need to have a much more professional approach similar to that in social services. But we'll wait for the outcomes. And finally, but very importantly, we're going to see increased regulation in the social housing sector. Not just increased regulation, but I think there's also a degree of levelling up there as well. The changes will be in place for all social rented landlords, whether housing associations or local authorities. And irrespective of local authorities have got an ALMO or not, we'll all be working to the same set of rules. We will at some point see a revised set of consumer standards. We'll probably hear about that from Kate and Angela, just waiting for the appropriate legislative slot for that to come through. Consultation has already started on a suite of tenant satisfaction measures, and there is a likelihood in a couple of years' time there could be some inspections or intervention by the regulator on a risk assured basis for us to look forward to. I think that in that new world, there's three really important things at the moment. One is, what will that regulatory landscape look like? Secondly, data management. I think that's come right up the agenda. I'll say a little bit more when I'm introducing Jonathan, but a lot of people I'm talking to at the moment are talking about their data and its condition, and whether they've got things on spreadsheets or bits of software, whether it talks to each other, whether it's accurate across both tenants and communities, but also assets. So we'll hear a bit more about that. And last but not least, we've got resident engagement and the tenant's voice. And I think it's appropriate that we have that towards the end of the session, where we hear from the speakers on the more technical side, and then we look at the resident engagement response and hear from residents. So I think without further ado, I think we start off the first session, and we've got Kate Dodsworth, Director of Consumer Regulation. I think Kate has been in post a few months and has been extremely busy. I think if Kate was a rock fan, she'd have one of these T-shirts on with a big list on the back of all the sessions she's done, all the people she's spoken to, and it would probably be a very, very long list. But welcome, Kate. And also to Angela Holden, who's an Interim Assistant Director of Investigation and Enforcement. Angela, you must have one of the scariest job titles going. And also, you're probably the person that people do not want to see. But I just want to say at this point, before we start off, that I think the regulator has done a fantastic job over the last couple of years. The regulator of social housing knew there was going to be big changes coming, was talking to the sector very early on, has taken part in lots of preliminary discussions, has been very open and transparent. The conversation you've had over the last 15 months or so around the tenant satisfaction measures, for example, has been very open, very inclusive. Conversations have taken place with not just the obvious stakeholders and professionals, but lots of round tables with residents and talking to them directly. And Jenny and I and a few others have been very impressed about how much has been done before it's even gone for formal consultation. And I think it sets a very good path for the future. But I do know that local authorities probably present the regulator with some new areas to look like, and a challenge, I think, for local authorities to work with the regulator in a way they haven't had to do before. So I think that just makes today's session really, really useful. So at that point, I think we're starting off, Angela, with yourself, and then you're passing over to Kate, if that's right.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Eamon. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for asking us to come and speak to you today. We think events like this are really important, and so we're really delighted to have been invited to come and talk to you today. Eamon gave us introductions. My job title has actually changed, Eamon, just since we last spoke. So I'm now Assistant Director in the Consumer Regulation team, working to Kate, and Kate will introduce herself in a second. Just if I could have the next slide, please. We're going to do our session today in two halves. So I'm going to start just with a little bit of context setting and talk about why compliance matters, talk a bit about some of the learning that we've seen from our current consumer regulation casework, including some of our work with local authorities, and some lessons for you to think about. And then I'll pass over to Kate and she'll talk about the white paper, what we're doing to implement that, and what you can start doing now to prepare for it. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm going to start with saying, why does consumer regulation matter? I really just intended to set the context, and I think everyone on this call will be clear that it matters because it's so important that people have good quality, safe homes to live in. You know, what more fundamental thing could there be that people feel safe and are safe in their homes? And I think we knew that before, but over the last couple of years with COVID, and when we've all had to spend significantly more time at home perhaps than we would have done in the past, I think that's become ever more apparent to us all. At the regulator, we've had a reactive role in consumer regulation for a number of years, but it hasn't lessened the importance of providers and local authorities meeting the standards. So we might not have been out proactively inspecting, but we have always been clear that having safe, good quality homes for tenants to live in has been important and remains absolutely fundamental. We've seen in recent months and recent years that the expectations of the sector are increasing. and that the sector is under ever greater scrutiny. Eamon mentioned in his introduction about Grenfell, and I think since then the sector really has been under ever greater scrutiny, and most recently what we've seen with various media reports and social media reports about the quality of accommodation that tenants are living in. So this isn't going away, and it's really important, I think, that all providers of social housing, including local authorities, are operating as effectively as possible, and that they're really prepared to deliver the changes that are coming down the track. The big change that the white paper asks for is really about that relationship between landlords and their tenants. There will be things that we'll implement, such as tenant satisfaction measures, proactive consumer regulation, but ultimately what it all comes down to is that relationship between tenants and their landlords and how effective that works. And I think one of the things that I would just emphasise is that that will take some time to get right. There are lots of organisations doing lots of good things in that relationship, but sort of building that and making sure that that relationship works as effectively as it can is so critical for delivering everything else that will follow through the white paper. And I think once organisations get that bit right, the rest of the areas of compliance that we might talk about should flow from that. So we're really encouraging people to start that work now, and to start on that relationship between themselves and their tenants. Could I have the next slide, please? I wanted to give just a bit of insight really into what local authorities and ALMOs should be doing now. And as I said at the start, this is really based on what we see in our current casework. What I've done is I've broken it down into 3 areas. The first one is systems and processes, and I'll talk about that in a second. The second area is delivery, and the third is tenant engagement. And I'll talk about each of those and then I'll come on to some lessons. In relation to systems and processes, what should you be doing now? It's really flippant, and it sounds like a flippant answer to say. The short answer is you should be complying with the consumer standards as they currently are. The longer answer is making sure that you understand what those standards are asking of you as organisations, and importantly, what compliance looks like to you as an organisation and what that compliance looks like on the ground. So do you have a clear enough understanding of what you need to do to deliver compliance across all of those standards? And within that, I'd include statutory health and safety compliance as well. The requirements there are broad, they cover a lot of areas, but making sure that you understand what that is and what you need to do. It's really, really important that local authorities and ALMOs have systems and processes in place to deliver what is needed for their tenants, and critically to provide your governing body, including your councillors, with assurance and evidence that you comply as well. So could you evidence that you meet all of the consumer standards, and could you provide that evidence in a meaningful and an understandable way to your councillors and to us if we asked, because at some point we will ask. So could you provide that in a sensible and understandable way? Could I have the next slide, please? So what about delivery then? What should you be doing now? I think I would really just underline the point that it's really important for councils to ensure compliance even when it's contracted out. So if it's contracted to a managing agent or an ALMO, making sure that you are ensuring compliance and that the systems and processes allow you to ensure compliance is really, really important. I think if I think about things like health and safety compliance, it's not just about completing statutory health and safety checks, as important as they are, but making sure that what you're doing is really good quality and that it gives you the assurance that you need, and that where there are areas of risk that they are being addressed. And I know you've got a session on data later, so I don't want to preempt what that is going to say, but I would just emphasise again the importance of really good data. So is your data of sufficient quality to support a compliant outcome? And are you able to give some meaningful and sensible reporting from that? And I think one of the other things I would just draw out in this section is really just about that relationship between you as councils and the ALMO. And making sure that that relationship works effectively for both sides. So making sure that the ALMO is able to show what it is delivering on the ground, making sure that you can demonstrate what you're delivering. And as councils, can you scrutinise that, and can you get a really clear picture of what is being delivered on the ground for your tenants? That's great timing on the next slide, thank you. And so the final point that I wanted to raise in this section was just in relation to tenants. And I know that Jenny will speak to this later as well. But really, as I said, the relationship between you as a landlord and your tenants is so fundamental to all of this, and making sure that you're engaging effectively with tenants now will really set you in good stead for the future and for delivering what you need through the white paper. Making sure you're treating tenants with fairness and respect is really key. And that might seem obvious, but trying to stand back and put yourself in the shoes of tenants. What's their experience like? What are they trying to tell you about their experience? It's such valuable insight from, in my opinion anyway, such valuable insight. What tenants tell you, they are receiving your services on the ground. They will have the best insight into where things are going well and where things could be improved. So thinking about how you can use what tenants are telling you, really, really critical. We're realistic that things can and they do go wrong. We do understand that. You'll know that as well. But making sure that you can identify at a really early stage when something's going wrong and handling those complaints well is a really great way to build tenants' confidence in their landlord. So putting things right at an early stage really matters, as too is using complaints as a way of learning. So what can you learn when things go wrong, and what can you do from that to strengthen your systems and processes to try and make sure that the same things don't happen again? Could I have the next slide, please? In the last 3 slides, what I've done is posed quite a number of questions actually for you to think about, but I wanted just to share a little bit of some of our casework where things have gone wrong. So some of the things that we've seen in our existing casework, these are not named, I'm not naming providers in here, but these are all real cases and things that we have seen during the course of our casework. Data, as I said, you know, you'll have your own separate session on it, but I can't tell you the number of cases where providers aren't able to tell us what stock they own, how many properties they own, what that stock needs in terms of statutory compliance checks, who's living in those properties, what their tenants needs. So making sure that you understand what stock you have and what tenants are in your properties and what they need is really, really critical. And I think making sure that your systems and processes support that. So we've seen previously small things like where providers haven't had a system to monitor the stock coming in to their portfolio or indeed leaving their portfolio, and that can cause some challenges. So really making sure that you've got good quality data. We're still seeing cases where providers don't understand the full range of what they're responsible for. I said earlier, requirements around health and safety in particular are wide, but unfortunately we still see cases where providers have maybe focused only on one area, perhaps gas or perhaps gas and fire, and have maybe neglected some other areas. And we've seen cases as well where they've contracted out the service to a third party to deliver, and we will keep reminding providers that contracting out delivery doesn't contract out your responsibility for making sure that homes are safe. We've seen providers not respond adequately to risks where they've been identified. For example, if you've done a fire risk assessment but not responded to the actions that are arising, or where they've not got a proper system to handle them in a sensible way, in a risk-based way, and you know, things seem a bit haphazard. So I'd really encourage you to think about the systems and processes you've got and make sure that that is a planned and sensible approach. And the last point that I wanted to raise was really just about organisational culture and the leadership that you all provide, because this is really how improvements will be delivered. We've seen things where they look like a fairly distinct failure, perhaps a failure to complete gas checks, but often when you look at it and when you go underneath it, what you see is the problems are much deeper than that. And I think what we've seen is things where perhaps compliance wasn't given a clear priority, or that your staff weren't aware that the leadership, that was the priority, that was what you needed to be doing, that how valuably you prized your tenants being safe. And we've seen issues where individuals working within organisations have identified issues on the ground, but yet they weren't able to escalate those issues and have them addressed, or worse, that they did escalate those issues but they still weren't addressed. So making sure that you've got an inclusive culture within your organisations and that you can demonstrate that effective leadership will be really key to delivering what you need going forward. And that's all from me. I'm going to pass over to Kate now.
Thanks, Angela, and well done for valiantly speaking to the previous slide. Nice one. We'll stick with this slide for a little while because it's my first one. Thanks very much. It's really good to be here with you. We've got roughly 20-25 minutes, and I want to make sure that we've got some time for questions. So I will skip through the rest of the slides reasonably quickly. As Eamon said, and thanks Eamon for the intro, that's the best thing to link me to being some sort of rock star. That's probably the point at which my housing career can end now. I'm at the top. I've been in housing for around 30 years, and I started with the regulator roughly 6 months ago to help and support the development of the move towards proactive consumer regulation. And I was speaking at an event a couple of months ago, And somebody said that she had written to her board, it is very good news that Kate has been working in the sector for 30 years. It is also very bad news that Kate has been working in the sector for 30 years, because there is an element of I know what it is like on the provider side. Having said all that, I've worked mainly in and around housing associations, so I need to demonstrate that I understand the operating environment that you are in local authorities and ALMOs and TMOs. So let's go back just roughly over a year ago now to the white paper, and Angela has covered a lot of ground here. But just to remind you, you know, when the white paper came out, it was seen as reasonably late after the green paper, where that had been published against the backdrop of the horrendous tragedy of Grenfell fire. And I think probably we all agree that nothing was going to be the same after that. And probably we all agree that the sector in its entirety across housing associations and local authorities was ready for a cultural reset, where universally good services, universally good quality homes, and most importantly, a respectful and transparent relationship between landlord and tenant was long overdue. And you probably remember the housing minister at the time, we've had so many, but Alok Sharma went out and did the round tables around the country with tenants, and time again, tenants were talking about the importance of clear communication, transparency, being treated with respect, and ultimately being able to report a repair and get it done, and having routes to redress. So I think that the white paper at its heart had a cultural shift. You'll remember the charter, those aims there within the Charter for Social Housing Residents. There is a range of proposals for a range of players that Eamon's already talked about, you know, more teeth for the Housing Ombudsman, building safety regulator to be sat within the Health and Safety Executive, and then proposals for us, the regulator. So next slide, please. So what's changing and when? I mean, there were some pretty big ticket items in the white paper proposals for us to move from a reactive position on consumer regulation to proactive. And it outlined a whole range of tools in our box, from routine inspections to reactive inspections and investigations, the lifting of the cap on fines, introduction of a set of tenant satisfaction measures, which I'll very quickly refer to in a moment, and some new consumer standards. Now, the observant amongst you will realise that we haven't yet got legislation for many of these proposals. We're out to consultation at the moment on the tenant satisfaction measures. Two reasons for that. One is that you don't need legislation for it, so we're just getting on with it. And secondly, you as providers will need a long lead in to set up systems and get your first year of data. So the consultation is open on those, and it closes on the 3rd of March. I'd urge you to get involved. Next slide, please. OK, so as Angela said, we'll be changing our consumer standards to sit with the aims of the white paper. But I think it's probably worth focusing on the actual outcomes. What is it that we expect from the shift from reactive to proactive consumer regulation? And I think at its heart it is that social housing is well managed, tenants' complaints are dealt with effectively and efficiently, tenants are treated with fairness and respect, and their diverse needs are taken into account. Thinking about that person that wants to report a repair, what does it mean for them if there is any vulnerability? What does it mean for them if their first language isn't English? How do you make sure that that same response and service is delivered? Social housing stock needs to meet the decent home standards. Landlords ensure that health and safety requirements are considered. Landlords comply with tenancy law and regulations and avoid unnecessary evictions. Tenants have access to information that hold their landlord to account. Tenants have opportunities to influence decision making. and landlords take account of the views of tenants in the management of their homes. And I know Jenny will be talking more about that. And ultimately, landlords work with other agencies across the piece to contribute to safety and well-being. You can see there that some of the changes were the white paper at a moment in time. And I think this is one of the things when something comes out from government at a moment in time and then it takes a little while to get into legislation. You can see a snapshot of what was focusing people's minds at the time. So you'll see something quite rightly there on an RP role in tackling domestic abuse, but less so on tackling racial discrimination. So I think it's important to take all of these things into account in dealing with different demographics, ethnographies and differences from your tenants. And it speaks to the point of understanding your tenants and understanding the data and making sure you know the needs of those particular groups. So next slide, please. So the role of the tenants in the white paper, tenants upfront and engaged. And this is a little bit on what we are doing and then a little bit on what we expect in the future. So before I started at the regulator back in the summer, there had already been quite a lot of engagement with tenants groups through umbrella bodies such as TPAS, and with individual landlords and their tenants. And we've worked a lot to engage with tenants throughout this as we've developed things like the tenant satisfaction measure consultation. And again, it won't surprise you that the messages coming from that are, we want clear communication. There is some anxiety that sort of things like tenant satisfaction measures could be gamed. You chase a target over there and something bad happens over here. So make sure that tenants are involved. And for us, it means talking to tenants and providers at every step of the way. So we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to consult formally and informally. Just last night, for instance, I was talking to tenants from Camden and Southwark about primarily the tenant satisfaction measures, but we will continue to build that through in our engagement. And I think the future, you know, if this is done well and we get to where we need to be on proactive consumer regulation, it will mean ultimately that tenants have a stronger, more respectful relationship with their landlord, can engage about the services and priorities, access to swift redress when things go wrong, and are able to hold landlords to account. I mean, I think it's really important that tenants have ways to influence and engage on the things that matter to them, no matter who the provider. But I come back to as well the idea of a tenant who wants one interaction with their landlord during the year, and that's to report the boiler not working or a leak. How is that experience for them? And how do you make sure as providers and at board and councillor level, how do you make sure through your data and dashboards that you know that that is a universally good and effective experience? So ways to engage, really, really important, but just at its most basic level, how do you get assurance that every tenant is having a universally good experience? So quickly move on, thank you. So preparing to implement. As Angela said, ensure compliance now with the current standards. That is the best way to get ready. Review your data, particularly in areas such as your assets, your homes. What do you know about it? Is it telling you patterns about where things are going wrong continually? Is it robust and accurate? Is it telling you what you need to know about your tenants and their diverse needs? Systems and processes, learning from complaints, we've said this long, and again at board and local councillor level, how do you know the patterns that those complaints are telling you? Can you find out very quickly where the pinch points or the points of failure are in your organisation from that? What's the culture like? And as ever, this is set from the top, from boards and councillors. What are you giving priorities? And I think that over the years there has been some sort of points made that maybe things at board and councillor level, some of the things that we've been talking about are seen as too operational to discuss. Well, I think if the last 6 months has told us anything through some of those unedifying media stories, it's that the operational has become strategic via reputation. So what is it that you need to know to get back to that social purpose, and engage with tenants about what they expect of you, start building that trust. And please, please, please respond to our consultations and tell us what you think. As I said, the tenant satisfaction measures consultation is open to the 3rd of March, so please do get involved. I think there's one more slide, so let's have that one. Tenant satisfaction. Joanne's fixed the sound. Yes, well done. Tenant satisfaction measures in the social housing white paper. I said earlier, this is the element that doesn't need legislation, so we're out first on that to consult. And the tenant satisfaction measures that we're proposing stick largely with what's in the white paper, but please get involved. Please encourage your tenants to get involved, because there are things around the edges that simply don't work. Then we need to know about it. As I said before, there's been some anxiety from tenants expressed that tenant satisfaction measures in and of their own could be used for gaming. And I think that's why this is just one element of our move to proactive consumer regulation. It needs to be seen within a much wider context of how landlords are operating. And we expect those to go live in 2023-24. But again, it's a can opener for us and a can opener for tenants to scrutinise. Is that it? Have I got one more? No, that's it. That was a very abrupt end. I never know where my slides are going to end, but thank you. I'll stop there. We've got 12 minutes. Any difficult questions go to Angela, and any easy ones to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Excellent. And if I could just say a couple of lovely phrases there, which I'm going to hang on to. When the operational becomes strategic through reputation, I think that's absolutely fantastic. I think lots of boards, whether housing association boards or councillors and senior officers, that's a very nice gentle wake-up call from you. So thank you very much. Everything in the chat has been about speakers and volumes and plugging things in and unplugging them. So as I say, if you do have any questions, this is your opportunity. Please pop them in the chat or pop your hand up. But in the absence of that, just for the moment, I will just start off with myself. It's all right, Kate. Could you tell us a little bit more about your links to the Housing Ombudsman Service and the new Building Safety Regulator? Because clearly there's plenty of room for maybe things to trip over each other. But presumably you are talking to those organisations, and any early thoughts?
Absolutely, and I'll have a first pop at this, and Angela, do come in if there's anything more. I think just go back to the first principle, Eamon. I think, you know, I would say this, wouldn't I? But it's good that the established regulator got proactive consumer regulation, because I think there's a real danger that people could be tripping over regulators and ombudsmen, and nobody wants that. I think it's right that there are very clearly defined roles. So the Housing Ombudsman, just to remind people, is for individual complaints and is a way for tenants to seek redress and even financial recompense. There's a clearly defined role there, and there will be a clearly defined role on the Building Safety Regulator. Now, for us, that means memorandum of understanding. That means us working together, which we are doing now at the inception of proactive consumer regulation, to make sure that the environment is not too cluttered and difficult to understand for both tenants and providers. That work is sort of at its early stages and will develop over time. But I think what we want to end up with is some very, very clear demarcations of territory to make sure that it's straightforward for providers to get involved with. I don't know if you want to add anything, Angela.
Thanks, Kate. Not very much. I think I would just say that we have worked long with the Housing Ombudsman. We've got long experience of working with the Housing Ombudsman and understanding where that line is, and I think that relationship works really well now, and we'll continue to look at where those where the handoff points are between the two organisations, making sure that we're clear and making sure that we can communicate that in a really clear way to people trying to navigate the landscape. The same will be said of the building safety regulator. We're at a slightly earlier stage, just as you said in your introduction, Eamon, really about the building safety regulator is in fairly early stages of its inception, but we are working with them. We have had some of those initial conversations about handoff points between us, the differences in our approach to regulation, what we will ask of providers, what they will ask of providers as well. So very keen to make sure that we get that right for people navigating that landscape.
Yes, thanks, Angela. And one of the reasons, Kate and Angela, I posed that question was that I think there'll be a challenge for us all going forward in terms of residents also being able to know where to post their concern, as it were, because my sense is that the Housing Ombudsman is saying, come to us if you're having a problem with your landlord in the complaints process. The regulator will be encouraging residents to also raise their voice and come forward. But I did see a case recently, I think, where a resident did a whistleblowing to the regulator, but it was quite an individual sort of complaint. So you have that bit then where you have to possibly gently refer them back to their landlord's complaint process and onto the Ombudsman if necessary, or you take it forward if it's got a compliance label on it. But there's some issues there in terms of communicating with our residents, isn't it, to make sure they know what this new world would look like and where they take their concerns. But that's just a general comment, I think.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think it is. I think it's about how we communicate that externally, how we talk to tenants about that, and how we explain what that landscape is. And as you said, making sure that people are directed in the right way and making that as easy for them as we possibly can do.
Lovely. I've got a question from Mary. And hello, Mary. It's ages since I've seen you. It's lovely to see you coming on the chat. And it's a really good one around the tenant satisfaction measures. And will they be proportionate for smaller organisations with small numbers of stock?
Should I jump in on that?
Yeah,
it's really interesting on consumer regulation. If you're a tenant, it really doesn't matter to you who your landlord is, or it shouldn't matter who your landlord is. Beyond that, we have a duty to sort of minimise interference and not to create an over-administrative burden, and we recognise that with smaller associations. So within our tenant satisfaction measures, we're proposing that for landlords with fewer than 1,000 homes, they would collect the data and share with their tenants, as everybody should, and they probably do that already. But there is no obligation to send it to the regulator. For providers over 1,000 homes, then there is an obligation to send that. Another slight bit of flexibility is that we're saying for providers with over 1,000 homes, that year's data must be from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. If providers have got fewer than 1,000 homes and have a different sort of financial year or a different reporting year, then use that year. So there's some subtle differences, as there are on the housing association side, on the economic side at the moment. There's some subtle differences around data and on the economic standards and what they're expected to send to us. But I think it's a very, very delicate balance, because I think, as I said before, if you're a tenant, then compliance, safety, respect, transparency are as important if your landlord is small or if it's large. So trying to strike that balance as we go through and develop proactive consumer regulation will be a real thing to do. And I should have said, sorry, just very, very quickly, we've set ourselves 3 rules throughout all of this. Number 1, everything we do must make a difference to tenants, otherwise why would we do this? That's the heart of the white paper. Number 2, we must be able to regulate it, so we can't go dancing off creating rules here, there and everywhere. We have to be able to regulate it. And number 3, it has to be deliverable by landlords, and I think that speaks as well to the smaller landlord point.
Okay, Kate, I've got I've just a couple of things to think about. I've got Councillor Belsey. Could I bring Councillor Belsey in? Had a hand raised. I don't know, David, if you can facilitate that for us.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I just listening to what you're saying. I quite like what's coming out. What I struggle with as a local councillor who's got a certain amount of Eastbourne homes in their patch, is that the tenants don't come to the nearest person to them, that's the person that represents them on the council, if you know what I mean. And I struggle actually sometimes that, all right, it's probably partly my fault, but is there a way perhaps that not housing associations, but ALMOs and things like that are controlled by councils could actually let their tenants know who represents them, not politically, but their views, and if they have a problem, they can. If they're not happy with the satisfaction they're getting through the housing, they could go to them and let them struggle on their behalf, sort of thing.
I'll have a go at that one. I mean, from our point of view, the landlord will be the local authority that we deal with, whether it's an ALMO or not. On the ALMO side, I mean, there is the board, so that is helpful in terms of corralling a lot of this. And I guess the other point, I mean, Eamon, you might want to pick some of this up, but I think from our perspective, again, we're sort of working within our principles, and one of the strongest one of those is that the primary relationship is between the landlord and tenant, and we won't prescribe how this is done. So I think in terms of that sort of very delicate choreography, that's probably something for providers to work out. I don't know, Eamon, if you want to pick up some of that.
Yes, thanks, Kate. And I think Councillor Belsey, I think it's a very good point you've raised. I think it'll be for us in the local authority sector to make sure that residents are aware of all the opportunities they have to raise a concern. I think that's one of the biggest things that came from Grenfell United, was that nobody was listening, and when we did say things, it was ignored. And I think you're absolutely right. There'll be the formal contact with your landlord through your housing officer or whoever. There should be a complaints process that should be followed through. They would then have access to the ombudsman, potentially the regulator. But I think you're also saying you've got local ward councillors, and please give us a shout as well, because you can also put in an inquiry on behalf of a constituent or a resident, and you can enable that conversation if it gets a bit stuck. So I think that's something maybe we'll look at in the wrap up at the end. I think it's how do councillors and how does the democratic processes as well as the formal processes all, I like Kate's press the reset button. How do we just take this opportunity to reset with residents all the different channels they can use? Because it could be quite frustrating if as a councillor you're being bypassed and people are going directly to, for example, the regulator when they could have resolved it locally.
I'm not worried about the bypassing so much. It's when by pure chance sometimes you hear there is a problem within an estate, and you go around there and these guys say, well, I've been trying to get this repaired for the last 3 years. And then you think, well, what, and you say, well, why didn't you contact me? Well, I didn't know you could do anything about it. Of course you can. We're elected members of councils to put pressure on things to get things done.
Very well made point. Very well made point. If we could just a little bit tight on time, Kate and Angela, there's 2 questions in the chat. If I can try and just take the 2 of them together. First of all, from Liam, will the regulator be looking at how HRA money is spent? I think there's a concern amongst residents for many years that HRA monies can be used elsewhere within council finances, and just to make sure that tenants get value for money and not shortchanged. And the second one from Councillor Shaw is, will the TSMs, contain something around both responsibilities and rights? I mean, we talk a lot about rights, but presumably there'll also be a degree of responsibility for both tenants and residents in the new world.
Do you want me to go first, Angela? And
yes, that's Kate.
You can pick up anything that I don't. First of all, on HRA, I know, we do not, apart from rents, we don't regulate local authorities on the economic side. So if there's any sort of sense that the HRA is a little porous, then that's not for us to get involved in. We're not proposing that. We're focusing on the outcomes for tenants. So that will be need to be managed by landlords. And the TSMs, I mean, we're pretty clear on the areas that the TSMs are going to cover, and those sit pretty true with what's in the white paper. But on responsibilities and rights, I'm not quite sure what that's referring to.
Yes, okay, yes, it's not totally clear from the question, but I know certainly around the building regulation side, I think we expect to see a sort of an underlining of landlord and resident responsibilities, you know, very much on the landlord side inevitably, but also residents, for example, shouldn't have barbecues on balconies and shouldn't do things in the way of fire escapes. So I think maybe the general thing as well is that for everybody, it'll be a conversation about the landlord's responsibilities, but also in some situations there'll be tenant responsibilities as well, which I know is an issue.
And interestingly, through a lot of our tenant engagement, that has come up from tenants about the desire. But again, I think that's something for landlords individually to communicate very clearly with their tenants. So thanks for, and you've got a thumbs up, so you've got that one.
And the final one, I think, is the possibility of it says that a white paper was due in Parliament in March. I think there's a couple of things there, maybe from Gary. One, obviously, there's a levelling up white paper, which I think is just coming out today. But I think do possibly mean around the consumer standards when that will get a parliamentary slot. Is there any more news, Kate, on that?
Yeah, I mean, it was reported in Inside Housing a couple of weeks ago that it was going to be March. We have no idea where that came from, and neither do colleagues in the department. But all I will say is that we are expecting it in the first half of this year, I think, is what I can say safely.
Lovely.
Angela will tell me off after, but I think that's what we're expecting.
Okay, well, I think we've used the time. Thanks very much, Kate and Angela. Really excellent presentation. Thanks for taking all the questions as well. Look forward to seeing you soon, but thanks for your contribution today. I know you've got to go off to something else, but thanks both again.
Thank you all very
Thanks everyone. Have a good morning. Bye.
Okay, well, that leads us on to there's a couple of questions in the chat. Please, I will do my best to fit them in as we go along, but I'm also jotting some of them down for when we get to our wash-up discussion at the end, because some of them are relevant for that conversation. I'm just about to introduce Jonathan Cox, who's Director of Data at Housemark, and just by way of introduction to this session, first of all, I think many of you will know Housemark, a very long-standing reputable organisation that's been looking after data and benchmarking and information issues for many years. Lots of landlords across the whole of the sector have benefited from their services. And I know that Jonathan will probably tell us where Housemark is taking the current agenda forward. But just to set the scene a little bit, I was interested to hear the regulator talking about data. And as I said, a number of our members in the NFA, we've actually set up a separate data group as well, where people who are doing all the number crunching and the data handling and insight are looking to share best practice amongst themselves, because some of my experience over the last couple of years are quite interesting. We've had organisations that have self-referred to the regulator. The regulators then come back very quickly with questions like, I know you said you got a problem on gas servicing. Could you also let me know how you stand on electrical issues, on asbestos, on lifts, and all of a sudden there's a big runaround behind the scenes to try and get the answer together. Inevitably, it means finding the data. It means finding the information, getting it collated, getting it back to the regulator. The regulator has also been saying, as I said in my introduction very clearly, that the data they see, two main chunks. One is tenants and data about your tenants and your community and knowing your residents. And the second one is about your assets. Not just the ownership of them, but their quality and what needs doing. So I think if data's not good, you won't be able to do the day job. If data's not good, you won't make the right decisions, particularly around asset management. And if your data's not good and the headmaster or the regulator comes knocking and you're scampering around trying to find it, you'll probably just dig the hole even deeper and get into a little bit more bother. So Jonathan, pass over to yourself to tell us more about how you see it.
Thanks, Eamon, and that's a really good summary. Certainly, I mean, I've been working in the housing sector for around about 20 years now, and I can certainly say that you know, and I've always been working in data, but the interest in data really has never been stronger. The interest in good data, the interest in getting data right and making good use of it. One Housemark member said to me recently, our board and councillors have never been more interested in data than they are now. So hopefully this is a timely slot. What I'm going to be looking at over the next 15 to 20 minutes is, I'll just tell you a little bit about Housemark, because I think that's important. But I wanted to use hot off the press data that we've got from our members to talk about some of the performance challenges we're seeing in the sector, but then kind of get under the skin of that a little bit and talk about some of the data challenges that we're frequently coming across at Housemark. And then a little bit about what the leaders and the innovators in the sector are doing. So in terms of Housemark, so many of you will know us, as Eamon says. We are the leading data-driven solutions provider for the UK housing sector. We're jointly owned by the Chartered Institute of Housing and the National Housing Federation. So though technically we're a private company, all our profits go back into the sector. And we have around about 350 social housing providers within our membership. That includes most local authorities, most ALMOs, and most housing associations as well. And that's in England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. We collect data from those providers so we can provide comparisons and insight. We also run lots of networking events for specialists within housing. And we also deliver consultancy support, particularly in the fields of data quality, value for money, compliance, and service design. And in terms of the current sector performance challenges, so we collect data monthly from social housing providers. So this is some hot off the press data for you in terms of some of the challenges we're seeing. Obviously, the external environment for both tenants and landlords is particularly challenging. I wanted to start off with what's happening around landlord expenditure. And this chart shows expenditure, i.e. the cost per property of running social housing over the past 4 years. And you can see that between 2017-18 and 2019-20, we've seen a dramatic escalation in costs. And a lot of these costs are, well, that increase is primarily driven by building safety work and increasingly retrofitting properties so that they're carbon neutral as we move towards net zero. What we did see in 2021 was actually a drop in that cost per property, but this is actually only a temporary drop. What we found is during that sort of pandemic year, we saw a lot of maintenance expenditure was delayed, particularly capital expenditure in properties. So that did temporarily drop the cost per property, but we're expecting it to increase with a vengeance this financial year. And so the background for social housing providers, and that's local authorities and housing associations, is things are costing more and more. It's also a tough time for tenants. So we've been plotting arrears monthly. And what we've seen is we did see an increase last financial year, and we've seen increases again in recent months. So we know what those increases are down to. The cost of living is increasing, you know, there's energy bills are going up, but there's kind of more difficulties on the horizon with the increase in national insurance coming in April. And of course, the £20 uplift on universal credit has been removed. So our data is showing a steady increase in arrears. That chart shows a slight decline towards the end of March. That's because typically housing providers do recoup some arrears towards the end of the financial year, but that's still finishing significantly up on the previous year, and we're expecting arrears to go up again in the next financial year. During the pandemic, landlords suspended letting services primarily for a significant number of months. And what this chart shows is the blue dotted line is the normal percentage of dwellings that were vacant at any one time and available to let. And it was normally 0.5%. But you can see from this monthly chart that the current percentages of vacant dwellings, this is UK wide, are currently running higher than where they were at before the pandemic started. Landlords have effectively struggled to clear that backlog of empty dwellings. And what does empty dwellings mean from a landlord perspective? Of course, it means that rent isn't coming in. So that's another squeeze on cost lines. We've also repairs services were also suspended, particularly non-emergency repairs throughout various points throughout the pandemic, although it did depend on the landlord's policies as to whether or not they suspended repairs services for longer periods or not. But what we found is even today, those non-emergency repairs volumes being completed per 1,000 properties over every single month this year has been below pre-pandemic levels. So the full bars on this chart show what the pre-pandemic level would be, and you can see that there was a good recovery in November. You know, repairs levels were almost back to pre-pandemic levels, but fundamentally landlords are dealing with a repairs backlog on average. Now, that's not all landlords. Some landlords have cleared the backlog, but the average landlord is still experiencing difficulties in getting repairs back up to speed. That can be linked to staff sickness, which is particularly high amongst operatives, but also linked to things like materials costs and so on. And we've seen a decline in resident satisfaction. This chart shows how resident satisfaction has declined over the past 5 years, and certainly our year-to-date results for this financial year show that they're down again. We've got two lines on this chart. One is the all-national figure, that's the dark blue line. The pink line is for larger housing providers, so those with over 10,000 units, and that is typically lower for a number of reasons which I won't go into, but you can see that whether landlords are small or large, satisfaction has been declining over the past 5 years. And the final slide on what's happening in the wider sector is around antisocial behaviour and complaints. What we've seen is that last financial year we did see a slight increase in antisocial behaviour cases reported, as well as the number of complaints made to landlords. But actually, this financial year to date, we've seen a significant increase. So that's around about a 20% increase in ASB cases reported to the landlord, and around about a 30% increase in complaints made to landlords so far year to date. So there's increasing traffic coming in to landlords for them to deal with. With complaints, we expected that to go up in line with the new role for the Housing Ombudsman when similar consumer regulation was introduced in Scotland. Over the course of 2 years, those complaints volumes doubled, so we do expect those to go up. But that rise in ASB is slightly concerning because, of course, housing officers already have quite busy workloads and typically are the first line for reporting those ASB cases. So that's kind of what's happening in the wider sector. If I were to summarise it, I would summarise it as increasing costs for landlords, still having to recover from the pandemic in terms of voids backlogs, repairs backlogs, tenant expectations increasing, and landlords not necessarily rising to those expectations in the way that they operate, applying downward pressure on tenant satisfaction. So I will move on now to some of the data issues that I mentioned that we're seeing within landlords. So previous slides were around performance pressures. These are specifically in relation to some of the data issues we're seeing. And then I'll move on to what some of the leading landlords are doing. So this slide shows that a survey carried out by Housemark of all our members found that 91% of housing professionals think there are some data quality issues within their organisation. Apologies for the slide, the formatting has changed slightly in this online version, but that's basically 91% of people working in housing think that there are some data quality issues within their organisation. And when we get called in to do data quality audits, which happens quite often, we find that these are some of the key issues that are driving that poor perception of data quality, or indeed the poor data quality. One is that data capture can be quite problematic for frontline staff with lots of fields to fill in, and as a result, quite often they're poorly populated, which if it's critical fields, that compromises the quality of the data. We see manual records operating in parallel with systems quite often, frontline staff not necessarily trusting the system data, and so keeping manual records as a kind of data backup. But of course, when the records are manual, all sorts of things can go wrong there as well. And it particularly results in different figures in different reports. Reporting scripts, which is how you extract the data from your system, are often poorly understood, and find that particularly the case for local authorities and ALMOs, where the people writing the script are often the central IT team, and the housing professionals don't necessarily know what's behind that report. For example, are garages included or not? And we quite often find that internally there's no rolling data quality audit in place, and of course that is best practice. Slide order has been changed around slightly, but I'll run with it. Data leadership. We found that our survey also found that 67% of business leaders are uncomfortable using data, which is quite a high figure for those people in senior positions. And what we found when we go in and kind of look at the data culture within organisations is that quite often data leaders will challenge the quality of data when performance is not where it should be. Some executives will say, but the data quality is simply not good enough. And actually, there'll always be some things that aren't quite right in the data, but it's really important for leaders to understand when data is good enough to drive business decisions. Generally, if your arrears look high, it's not by unpicking one or two accounts where the figure might be wrong that's going to change your overall position, which is that arrears are high. We quite often find that execs are unable to adequately explain performance, and we quite often see additional KPIs being added into reports. I don't know if people on the call have seen KPI reports that have hundreds of figures in, and it just makes it hard to understand what's going on. And really that usually happens when people are unable to explain what's going on behind the figure, so they think the solution is to add in another figure into that KPI report. We've seen instances where the internal culture discourages bad news. It's really important that landlords properly understand how they're performing, and that when things aren't right, that they actually accept it and address it. And we have found instances where there's such pressure to meet targets that applies a pressure lower down the hierarchy of staff to meet those targets through working with the data in order to meet the targets, which of course defeats the whole purpose. We quite often find that tactical decisions are taken in silos within landlords, and actually if you brought in some cross team thinking, you could come up with really good solutions. We find some landlords, and this is particularly true of local authorities, aren't ready for consumer regulation yet. You heard from the regulator earlier this morning about those tenant satisfaction measures. This fundamentally sets down some key definitions for those performance indicators for landlords, and we find a lot of local authorities don't yet have the data in place to be able to effectively report against those. And commonly, there is no data and BI strategy in place in order to address some of these issues. So they're just some of the common issues we come across. What about best practice? So I've bundled what sector leaders are doing into 4 key themes in terms of what we're observing. And one is around leveraging the data, making sure that the data is is accurate, and that it can be used to inform decision making in a really kind of mature way. And one of the things that a lot of landlords are doing is centralizing different data sources into one data lake, if you like. And the advantage of that is you get this single version of the truth, but it also means that you can bolt on the top of it really sort of real-time interactive reports that give you an idea, a real idea of what's going on across the business. We find that particularly some landlords who are more advanced on the data maturity journey are using things like asset component data and predictive analytics to inform their investment choices, so to really target where they need to invest in their properties. And on the customer side of things, we find that the most advanced landlords are doing sentiment analysis of customer feedback and also customer segmentation. So not all tenants are the same, and it's really about understanding things like communication preferences, personal circumstances, and tailoring the service that's delivered to the residents' needs. A lot of talk about getting serious about engagement, and this fits really well with what the regulator's talking about in terms of that new consumer regulation. In the past, resident engagement was kind of seen a little bit as a kind of governance thing. So have resident board members, various panels, if you like, to for involved residents. But really, all the talk now is about taking it beyond that very governance focus and looking at how residents who aren't necessarily engaged residents, how they can feed into service design and so on. And one key theme, a key shift really that we're seeing is a move towards co-design rather than consultation. So previously, landlords coming up with a proposal and taking them to engaged residents and saying, what do you think of these? But actually starting right from the right at that design stage and getting residents involved in that. Seeing lots of voice of the customer dashboards appearing up and down the sector, which are a great way to bring together customer feedback and complaints information so that people can really see how their residents feel. Lots of landlords rethinking service delivery. So this is how do, given those increasing costs, but also the need to improve customer satisfaction, how can service delivery be redesigned to meet those objectives? In the Housemarque data, we've seen a significant growth in roles relating to the customer experience, relating to business intelligence, welfare advice, building safety, and of course sustainability. So lots more roles in these kind of spaces. And we've seen a trend towards kind of enabling those frontline housing officers with technology to be a single point of contact. The idea that a housing officer can be out and about with an iPad, a resident approaches them and says, this repair I reported weeks ago, what's been done about it? The housing officer can look up that repair right onto the database there and then with the resident and show them how they can do it themselves. And of course, what quite often goes wrong in service delivery is lots of handoffs between different teams and requests getting lost. And so it's really about minimising those handoffs and minimising the waste and making everything just run much more smoothly. And a big focus on communal areas, as you might imagine. So, we quite often find in our service reviews that communal areas, quite frankly, aren't up to scratch, and that there's very poor performance reporting about the state and the cleanliness and the safety of communal areas. So lots of landlords applying focus in there to get really good data and make sure that that those areas are well maintained. And then finally, obviously, there's lots of competing priorities on money, but lots of landlords investing in technology. So online portals for simple transactions, such as raising repairs or paying rent, management software to help them deliver core functions such as rent collection and communal inspections, looking at things like green fleets and geo-tracking as well. So there's some of the things we're seeing in terms of key sector trends to rise to the challenges. In terms of Housemarque's work that we do, we help landlords with all of these, and we help leverage our network to unlock that best practice. I hope that's been helpful, and I hope I've run to time, Eamon, and that we've got a little bit of time left for questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jonathan. It's always great to learn a few things, isn't it? So I've got data lakes and sentiment analysis. Something for me to have a look at. For any of you on the line, if you need any translation of that, if you are members, I assume, please get in contact with Housemark, and I'm sure they'll tell you a lot more about those individual tools. If I just start off myself, Jonathan, with one, I think we're going to need a degree of flexibility going forward, aren't we, in what we actually collect, because the policy landscape is sort of changing as we go along. If I give you an example, CO2 alarms, we put a shout out to our members, how are you doing on CO2 alarms? If the government said you've got to have them in all social rented housing by October, and I don't think we're different to any other part of the sector. It was, hold on, I better just go away and check and come back and then say, I think we've got about 10,000 to do, full stop. It's a nice round number, it's a big number, but it's probably not accurate. It could be 6,000, it could be 16,000, but it's that sort of portable appliance testing. You may have to know as a landlord what portable appliances you've got in tenants' homes, whether it's in sheltered housing or extra care schemes or in furnished accommodation, to know whether you've done the PAT testing or not. So that presumably Housemark can adjust their systems and help with data collection and introduce that flexibility as the policy landscape changes.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. In terms of the data that landlords collect, like you say, a lot of it is already there, but there are significant gaps. And as the policy landscape moves, landlords do become more aware of some of those gaps. So say, for example, we've noticed in a recent exercise that we did that reporting around environmental, social and governance type metrics is not as good as it should be because the data's simply not there. And the answer to that really is having an architecture, a data architecture within your organization that can be flexible and agile. And I think having that architecture in place requires an overview of all your systems and bringing those systems into one place in a really sensible way that can really pivot and adapt to collect fresh data.
Lovely, thanks very much. I'll just look at the hands raised. I think we've got Ruth. Ruth, if you're able to ask your question. I'm not sure if we can get Ruth unmuted. We'll come back. Mary's asked a question about, are we getting the slides, because they're going very fast and she's taking lots of notes. Yes, they'll all be, it's both recorded and the slides will be made available afterwards. Got a question I'm just going to read from Sue Barham, which has come through in the chat. Do we know to what extent the increase in complaints is related to increase in channels available to report complaints and increased awareness? Presumably we can expect to see an increase with landlords' responsibilities as they publicise and make their complaints processes more transparent and available.
That's absolutely right. We believe at Housemark that the majority of the increase is due to this increased information about how to make a complaint, increased channels about making a complaint. So it's not necessarily linked to service delivery having dropped, although there were pressures during the pandemic. I think it is a case of residents being more comfortable and more knowledgeable around making complaints. And that's obviously a good thing. A high number of complaints isn't always a bad thing. It gives landlords really useful insight in terms of how to improve. Lovely.
I'm not sure, David, if we can, I think got Ruth Sarsin, who's got a hand up there. I don't know if we can bring Ruth in, or Richard, you've also got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Eamon, and thanks, Jonathan. Fascinating presentation. I'm very much in the camp of those who've never thought about data as much in their careers as I have done in the last year or so. And a lot of the issues in terms of performance and in terms of processing, data processing, resonated quite keenly with me. I wondered if you could just say a few words about Housemarque's data audit and health check service in terms of what that looks like for an organisation that might engage in it, and what the outputs of that kind of activity would be.
Sure. So if you have got data quality concerns within your organisation, quite often it's specifically around a certain section of delivery. So quite often it'll be like, we've got concern about repairs data, or we've got a concern about voids data, or whatever it is. And what Housemarque does is we come in and we look at the end-to-end process for capturing data right through to reporting it. So a typical audit will simply look at how it's reported and how it comes out of the system, whereas we work our way right back to the beginning and see how the data is being keyed into the system, how the system is treating it. We look at the scripts in terms of what's in and out, and then we look at how that data then gets turned into KPIs that are reported to residents and boards. So it's a really holistic audit that provides you with assurance that the figures are correct, or recommendations on how to get it correct. But what I would say on top of that is I would encourage local authorities who are looking to improve their data maturity to kind of take a very strategic approach at first, and work out where you want to get to and what you need to do to get there. Because I have seen instances where landlords have kind of spent money putting sticking plasters on various things, or investing in technology in kind of isolation of an overall strategy. And if you really want to do this in a cost-effective way, it's about setting up that data and BI strategy, which fundamentally might have quick wins about data quality early on in the life cycle. But it's really, you know, how is your culture, how is your technology, how are your skills going to be different in 3-4 years' time in order to achieve your objectives?
And Jonathan, just one quick one from me. BI for everybody else's benefit.
Oh, sorry. I'm really sorry. I always use acronyms. BI stands for business intelligence. Okay. So it's fundamentally turning data into insight to help you run the business more effectively. Lovely.
No, thanks, Jonathan. Okay, I'm not sure if it could be third time lucky if we can bring Ruth in. I think David.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, lovely, Ruth.
We've got there. Far away, please.
Yeah, it was a question from Debbie, who's chair of Told and Tie, which is our tenants organisation. She's had to leave. She was just asking me if I could find out about retrofitting. Jonathan mentioned the high costs for retrofitting council homes, and what are the plans to do that across Lewes and Eastbourne? Because it wasn't mentioned in the business plan. There's no provision for costs in the business plan for this. How are other housing providers raising these? The funds needed to retrofit homes, and how is that being considered across in Eastbourne?
Sure. So there might be a question in there for the later session, mightn't there, Eamon, in terms of what Lewes and Eastbourne are doing. But what's happening more widely in the sector is that there is an awareness that this is going to cost a lot, and that those funds need to be raised in order to pay for retrofitting and move towards net zero. I would say that the average provider is still trying to get the data in order to do the financial planning for this. So it's really important, first of all, that you understand the current state of your assets and what their carbon footprint is, but also then you are able to cost it and look at those costs in the long term and what your cost profile is going to look like. And of course, most of this will be capital spend that needs to be unlocked through borrowing, and therefore it's really important in terms of borrowing that providers have good data to demonstrate that they can repay the funds. But it is, if there's one thing social housing executives are losing sleep over, it's probably the cost of net zero.
Yes, Jonathan, and Ruth, and Debbie as well. I can just add to that as well to say that it is probably the biggest question we've posed of government as a trade body over the last few months, is that there's a lot of competing demands, a potential decent homes enhancement. You've got local authorities wanting to build new homes. You've got investment to deal with building safety issues, preparation for regulation, as well as rising costs of both materials and labour, putting pressures on. And then along comes zero carbon as well. So to cut a long story short, there's a number of government pilots and initiatives running at the moment, but the challenges are clearly financial, but there's also a number of them around labour, the technology, the availability of technology at scale, especially retrofitting properties. It's a completely different ball game, as you know, to new build. So yeah, you've got a very relevant question. Jonathan and I probably just don't have the answers for you, except that we are making representations to BEIS and to government, and that's the Business Enterprise and Industrial Strategy Department, about the need to help us inevitably with this. There's
it might be worth adding as well, Eamon, that Housemarque's currently carrying out a research exercise into decarbonisation and where the sector is at. So, you know, we'd really love listeners who want to take part in that.
Great, that will really help us going forward. There's a very relevant question from Liz as well, which Jonathan, if it's okay with you, you can chip in and I can get a little bit of a trade body response as well, saying there's been a significant increase in ASB across the sector, and an increase in complaints relating to ASB. Some of this is to do with the legal restrictions that were in place during the pandemic, and for example, restricted access to courts, and there's now backlogs. But just is it your sense as well? I know you did a presentation at the beginning about some of the trends, that there has been an increase in reports and complaints about ASB across the sector?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So it's something that we're seeing on average. There has been that 20% increase year to date in reports of ASB, and these are new reports of ASB. So it's not related to the court backlog. This is people reporting ASB for the first time, and I think what we attribute it to some extent is the difficulties that, you know, tenants are facing. You know, as it's the climate is quite difficult at the moment, but we are seeing that increase, and the increase is particularly sharp in urban areas. So when you look at ASB cases in places like Leeds, Sheffield and Manchester, they are increasing significantly.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I think I would just add to that as well. At the NFA, we're seeing a very, very similar trend of increase in both reporting. And interestingly, when it comes to the tenant satisfaction measures and the consultation that's currently out, there are some proposed measures. For example, satisfaction with your landlord's approach to handling antisocial behaviour. There's also a proposed question around your satisfaction, your landlord making a positive contribution to your neighbourhood. And some of the early feedback from our members is that he puts the landlord in a very difficult place, this one. We'll see whether or not the regulator changes any of the wording or the definition of this area. But increasingly, our members are saying that, for example, not only the courts there's a backlog there, but the police, for example, in many areas don't have the resources to help with what they call low-level criminality. And then residents then look towards the landlord to resolve issues of, you know, people on bikes and drug dealing, which actually is a criminal offence. But it being left to landlords, as it were, to sweep up and deal even with domestic violence. It's terrible to say, in race hate crime in some situations, there isn't the resources to see it through. It falls on the landlord, and satisfaction, you know, will probably take a dip. But we'll see what the regulator decides in terms of final definitions. But it is definitely an issue for us in the sector at the moment.
Yeah. Anecdotally, we have heard of housing officers effectively taking on more because support services aren't available elsewhere or have been restricted elsewhere. So particularly around things like safeguarding and so on, there has been an increase. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. I don't think hopefully I haven't missed any questions in the chat. I don't see any more hands raised. We're about a minute off, so I don't think anyone will stop us having an extra minute on our break. Just to say, Jonathan, thanks very much for both setting the scene, I think, in terms of what's happening in the sector at the moment, but also some really good thoughts and insight, if I say that, about where things are going in the future. Hopefully, members will engage with you even more as they have to crunch their data and get on top of things. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
At this point, we're going to take a comfort break for about 10 minutes or so, or then before we hear from Jenny. So please do that, and if we can all get back at about 11:10. Thank you very much for bearing with us. Thank you. Hello, Jenny. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
How you doing? Yeah. You all right?
Yes, fine. Thank you.
Thank you for listening into all of that. That was
Yes.
Always pick up a few new snippets, don't you?
Absolutely. Gosh, every time.
Swimming in a data lake. I'm not sure how that goes.
No. I thought he was going to make some kind of reference, like, and then things go on the top like a boat, or
Yeah.
And I was thinking this analogy can run and run.
Yeah, and watch out for the iceberg, because there's always more
Or
below
the Loch Ness monster underneath. Oh, we could go anywhere with that. Could have fun with that one.
That's what we'd have done with it, you see.
Yeah, drowning. Gary's just said drowning. Yeah, definitely drowning in a data lake. That's very true.
Yeah.
Jenny, David here, if you want to click on take control for your slideshow when you're ready.
Thank you. Are you going to cue me up, Eamon, and just welcome back?
Yeah, I think we're just about there. So welcome back, everybody. Thanks very much for sticking with us. Hopefully you enjoyed those first 2 sessions. And as I said earlier, I think very importantly, I think we round off the morning with a presentation from Jenny Osbourne, Chief Executive at TPAS. I know many of you will know Jenny. One of the things I was going to say, Jenny, is I think it's interesting that lots of things you've been saying for many, many years, long before Grenfell and long before some of the changes that are coming through, are now resonating with everybody from the Housing Minister to civil servants to ourselves as professionals and landlords. So hopefully those messages are going to go down even more strongly than ever. But just a little bit, Jenny, Chief Executive TPAS, been involved in tenant engagement, I say, for quite a while, but a couple of little sidelines. She's also chair of Stockport Group in Manchester, and also sits on the NFA board as a representative. I'm sure you've got a few other hats that I probably missed, Jenny, but for today, I think it's you just giving us our thoughts on how we're going to evolve resident involvement and engagement to this new policy world. And over to you, Jenny.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Eamon. I think my only other hat at this moment in time is servant to a 17-week-old puppy. That's all I do as well. That seems to be my new role in life, catering to wherever you need. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here today. Really fascinating morning so far. I've picked up loads, as Eamon said, from the speakers this morning, and luckily lots of synergy with what I'm going to say as well. So you'll hear a little bit of repetition. So apologies for that, but also it's never a bad thing, is it, to have points underlined and rescored? So hopefully you're all okay with that. So very quickly, what am I going to cover today? So just a very quick introduction to TPAS, just to explain who we are. Bit about, very quickly again, why do engagement? I'm going to reflect and go back again on that, and it's lovely that Eamon keyed that up again, because I have been saying some of these things. TPAS have, and others in the sector, for many years. I've asked to talk about the TPAS National Engagement Standards. I'll talk about that, and then we'll take a little bit of a reflection on kind of where I think good engagement looks and what people are doing right now across the sector around improving their engagement processes. So hope that fits with everybody. Okay, so just a little quickly one about TPAS, what we do. We're the tenant engagement organisation working across England. We're a membership organisation of tenants and of landlords. Key principle here: tenants and landlords working together. That's the principle on which we are based on, and that's what we do. Try to improve services, save money, and lasting change. And we've currently got about 275 landlord members, over 1,000 tenant groups of various types, and about 28 commercial members. And by that I mean principally contractors working in the sector that do the repairs, maintenance, etc. in people's homes, as well as others. So that just gives you a little flavour of TPAS. I think I've got a slight delay on my slides, but if I will catch them up. There we go. Okay, so again, like I said, quick reflection. Why have I always said, and why have many in the sector, or why would you do engagement? Why do you need to do resident engagement in social housing? Well, for me, and it remains, there's kind of three primary reasons why you do it. One has always been, for me, there's a business case to do resident engagement. It makes sense to your bottom line. It makes sense to how you deliver services. You deliver better services if you get residents involved. We've been saying this for years. There's been loads of evidence about doing that for years. Residents can help you drive out some of the inefficiencies we may have in our organisations. We've been making that case. There's also an absolutely overwhelming social, personal, community reason, if you like, to do engagement. You know, we've seen lots of people get involved with landlords in their structures in various ways. That's gone on to them getting more involved in the landlord, getting involved in bigger committees, going on the boards, getting involved, getting jobs from that experience, the community engagement that goes on, the intel, the links to communities, all of that. Big reason there. What's been lacking, of course, in the last few years has been the policy driver to do that. From the kind of, once we went hands-off regulation around consumer regulation, we've not really had, well, an interest and then policy and regulation to do engagement. But of course, that landscape has now changed with the white paper and is coming big time to us over the next few years as well. So in some ways, we've got the triangles completed for me, what I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for that policy. But the other thing that's kind of been always at the centre of that really has been around safety. And that's also the big difference, as Eamon's alluded to, since Grenfell. And another way of kind of looking at this, and a way we're trying to kind of look at it for people at the moment, is talking about it in this way. Well, you know, what's in it? Well, it's what's in it for everyone. Let's not talk about resident engagement about what's in it for residents, but what's in it for every single person in an organisation, chief execs, council leaders, councillors, every single member of staff. Because if we do it right, it absolutely leads to those improved services. It absolutely leads to the value for money being improved. Everyone wants that, and it builds those stronger communities. And what we've been saying for a while now is that it's just good business sense. And the reason we talk like that, the reason we say it, it's because we might not always win the hearts and minds of people in our organisations to do engagement. We might not. And we might not also change people because policy's telling us and regulations telling us we've got to change. OK. But I think for most people in an organisation, they get the sense of a business case to say this is a good reason to do this. We often talk at TPAS of this mythical asset manager in our mind that doesn't want to do engagement, isn't interested in engagement. If we can convert those staff to think differently about resident engagement, we can really start to make sure everyone's taking it seriously and it's everybody's business. I'm not going to spend long talking about the white paper. You've had enough of that this morning, I think, and you'll all have read it. It just suffice to say, TPAS are really pleased with it. Just like Eamon mentioned before, very pleased with the direction of travel, very pleased with some of the pace that we've seen so far. We'd like it to come quicker, the legislation. I know everybody would. But generally, what I always say is I can hear the conversations from some of the tenants I met at the round tables 3 years ago. I can hear what they said and I can see where it's appeared in this white paper. And I think we should all take some comfort in that. And what's gone round it in the other work that's happening, I think just proves to me that this is a direct direction of travel that isn't going to stop anytime soon, and rightly so. Really pleased that these have all been mentioned as well today. So you've kind of heard these already, but like I say, the repetition is good, because for me, the point that's being made by Fiona McGregor, the chief exec there, and then Kate, as you can see, who spoke today, is that this new consumer regulation, this proactive one, has got to make a meaningful difference to tenants. And I think that's I feel that's very much my job. I know it feels like the job of Eamon and lots of us in the sector to go, we have to keep focused on that. Is it doing that? Because we can't get this wrong this time, in my opinion. It's got to be the time it's right once and for all. And I think it's important that the regulator talks about that so firmly. Got to be meaningful for tenants. It's got to be regulated. That's important to tenants. They don't want a system that can't be clearly articulated. And it's got to be deliverable as well. No one's looking for anyone to have to jump hoops here. I think it's interesting what's said here. The primary relationship is between landlords and their tenants. So focus on what matters to your tenants, to your residents. Great line, but that's hard to do, isn't it? When you've got so many competing priorities. How do you do that? And how do you weave through everything else that's going on around building safety, net zero, building new homes, homelessness, all of that, to focus on what matters to your tenants? But the reality is that's what we've got to do. And again, this quote from Kate, I think she said it about 3-4 months ago now, and I just repeat it everywhere I go, and I'm glad she repeated it today. The operational has become strategic. I think there's been too much of a drift in the sector over the last few years going, we're, particularly in HAs, we're boards, we focus up here on the big stuff, but actually what's being missed completely underneath is a lot of the operational stuff that was going wrong. And you can see where the tensions come for tenants, that they felt they've not been able to get their voice heard. At the strategic level, no one was interested in the operational. I'm generalising, obviously, for a fact. I think the chance to say to boards, to people in leadership roles, to say, actually, what you do day to day on housing management, on antisocial behaviour, on, let's be clear, repairs, the biggie, is absolutely crucial to how we run a business and your risk and your reputation as an organisation. I think it's a really fantastic quote to keep for all of us to keep firmly in our mind. And so taking what's been said and the context of where we've been pushed in terms of the regulation, rightly so, what does good engagement look like from my opinion? Well, I'm going to focus, aren't I, on the TPAS National Engagement Standards. I'm going to mention these because, and the reason why is because they're still born out of years of experience. So we launched these pre-green paper, we then relaunched them pre-white paper, and we've relaunched them again post-white paper, all the time taking account of what's being said. Can you just check for me, Eamon, are you seeing my notes on the right hand side or not? You're just seeing the slides? Just in the slide.
Yes, just the slide. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So I'm thinking that was very distracting for people. So what have we got here is what I think are the 7 things you need to do good engagement. And this is sometimes a bit shock for people. Actually, people go 7 things to do engagement. Well, God, it's not that complicated, Jenny, but actually it is. And it is if you want to get it right across the whole business. And these things have come from years of talking to tenants, years of talking to engagement staff, years of talking to senior teams and boards to say, what do you need? And constantly honed. You can see what they are there: governance, scrutiny's there, strategy, business and strategy, complaints, obviously the biggie, info and comms. You need good resources for engagement. Again, I think over the past few years, we've lost some of our engagement staff in the sector. We lost money towards engagement. We pulled out of community engagement for some organisations. We need to think about our investment in engagement across the business. But fundamentally at the centre of it, and this has been mentioned how many times today already, it's about culture. It starts at the top, and it starts with leaders like yourselves having the vision, and that being a vision that you communicate across all parts of the business. It's got to be something, resident engagement's got to be something you believe in. It's got to be something you think is absolutely integral to your business. I think what's interesting is we've lined these up against what the Regulator of Social Housing is doing, so there's some of their requirements that they've got here. We've lined it up against what the National Housing Federation's Code of Governance is. We've lined it up across everything that people in the sector are doing, and that's all of these. And I think what that's trying to do then is saying, let's not just say good practice, let's line it up with regulation as well. So if you do all of these, if you hit all of these 7 areas and you look at your culture, then you are going to be meeting all of these requirements across everybody. I know these don't apply to all of you, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. I'd urge you to have a look at those standards. They're a really good framework for you to start with. What we are doing a lot of work, as you can imagine at the moment, is we are in a lot of organisations who are wanting to talk to us about their resident engagement. And we're doing what we're calling real kind of deep dive discovery sessions with staff, with tenants that are very involved in your structures, tenants that aren't so involved in your structures, with boards, with senior teams, really going back to say, well, what does good engagement look like for you? And what have we done well here, but what's not going so well? All this kind of stuff. I hope you can read some of those quotes. This is from a local authority we were doing last year. It was a session. And there were some real positives in here, but some of the negative comments that were coming out are really tough to hear for staff, for involved tenants that have been part of structures. And the one for me, you can see some of them, but the one for me that's always stuck out was a couple. The one about tokenism, I think, is a fair one. I think we could all probably take that on the chin and say, Have we done a bit of that? I know it's impossible to read. I'm sorry about that. So I'll make sure we'll get these out to you. But there's one about the council's been guilty of tokenism. They ask for our opinions effectively and then really don't do anything with it. I think some of us across the sector, all of us could say, you know, we've probably done some of that at times. The one that always strikes for me is somebody that said, deafening silence does not mean that everything is okay. And I think that's really, really important. And we've been talking about this more and more across the sector over the last few months, haven't we? Particularly the Ombudsman, where people, just because people are not reporting things to you or not telling you things does not mean they are happy with how everything is. And I think what we're seeing as a change in the sector now is people saying we have got to go out there and find what people are telling us far more than not waiting for people to come to us. We've got to go to them and find out what they think and what they feel. Because there's a danger, isn't there, I think, in resident engagement, and this is where we've all got to change, all of us in the sector, of just thinking, well, what we see is all there is. And there's a danger we do that as senior teams, as board members, as councillors, as exec, whatever. This is what we get. This is the report we get. This is what we're being told. So therefore, this is the truth and the facts. And that's not how it is it? We perhaps have been, all of us in the sector, a little bit too guilty of taking too literally hearing customer voices, going and doing a survey, going and talking to some tenants at a meeting, hearing what they've got to say, and then that's it. That's the fact. That's the only experience. That's the only thing that we need to think about. I think we've all been a bit guilty of doing that. And then we're also then, aren't we, at risk of only listening to the customers are really engaged with us and involved in our structures. And the problem with that, when we do that, it's not, you know, denigrating anybody that gets involved in our more formal structures. The problem with some of that is that we have some bias, don't we? And I don't just mean around age or those kind of demographics, but it's also about the experiences people have had. I give an example. My team give this example. We talk about this a lot. We've heard many times, haven't we? Someone perhaps in your staff team needs to create a new rent income strategy. So they write something down, they come up with something, and then they take that strategy to a group of tenants, involved tenants, and say, what do you think? And there's some tweaking goes on and there's some suggestions, and we all think, excellent, we've involved tenants in that strategy. The issue you can often have, though, is the people that put themselves forward to comment on this strategy have never been in rent arrears. They've actually got stable incomes. They've never had any potential problems in their homes. Their lives have never got chaotic. They've never lost their job. They've never had the experience of knowing what it's like to go into rent arrears or to receive that phone call or that email or that letter and the stress and the upset that that brings. But yet we're asking them to comment on the strategy for something that they've never experienced. We've got to do better at not just acting on potentially biased, uninformed or unexperienced opinions. And what about the people that might need our services in the future? How are we talking to them? Again, if we only ever think about the people that have used a service, then we're never thinking about how people in the future might want to use it. I think the thing I'd want to land for you all about good engagement in the future and what the regulator's going to want to see is we have got to be far more curious as people. Often we say, do something that says the customer has to do something. They have to fill in a survey for us. They have to send us something in. Why do we have to keep doing that? Often what we get from residents when we're talking to them is they say, Jenny, why don't they just already know this already? Why don't they know what the service is like already or what the problems are? We've told them so many times before. Why aren't they looking at their data to tell them where people are recording complaints or where repairs are highest? Why do we have to keep telling them? So I think we've got to stop asking so much and actually start to move to getting on with things in resident engagement. And rather than that kind of phrase that many of us I think have seen or heard is, you said we did, which is great. We might need to start being a bit more in the area of we've noticed and we've done. So not expecting them to come and tell us, but us taking ownership and control to say, we've noticed this is interesting here. We've noticed repairs over here are increasing. We've noticed that nobody's reporting repairs from this estate. Why? What's going on there? Let's go out there and do a bit more of a deep dive on that. So I think there's a real change here about not just relying on some of our more traditional structures for people to be on. If we're going to meet what the regulator wants, which he says, you've got to make sure you understand your tenants and their priorities. Conscious of time, so I'm going to really speed up. I've had a little bit of the same problem as I think I had earlier in terms of slides going out of sequence, so I'm going to just jump ahead hopefully to one. And I just want to talk about where are our engagement opportunities? Where are they in your organisation? And I think what I'd say to people is we've got to expand our mind about where they are. They're everywhere. They're every day in your touch points that you have with your residents. And I think, again, when we think of it, we tend to jump, don't we, to thinking it's those editorial panels, it's those performance reviews panels, it's our scrutiny groups, that's engagement. Let's just make those better. But actually, engagement happens across the organisation. And the majority of tenants and residents will never get involved in your formal structures. Never. They just don't want to do it. They've got busy lives, not interested. So what we have to make sure is that where the majority of our tenants are, which actually it's every single tenant, will report of repair probably at some time, will pay you rent, will look at your website. They will all do that. So let's make that brilliant. Let's think about how we're using that engagement opportunity to maximum effect. Because if you've got 10,000 tenants, probably 9,000 of them, 9,500 will stay in this pyramid section called Be Aware. They'll never do anything else. That's fine. But they've got experiences and things are happening to them and they're behaving in certain ways that you need to understand. As we move down this pyramid, less and less people will be involved, but they'll do the more formal mechanisms. They might do a survey, they might complete it for you, they might comment on social media. And then we move to what we mentioned before about co-creation, collaborating, the scrutiny groups, and then people on boards on those really important strategic panels. But I just think I'd like to just land the point is, you won't get tenants involved in everything, and that's okay. But every tenant has an experience they need to share with you in some way or another. I think the thing as well, again, just to sort of pick up on this, going back to the white paper, there will be tenants who want to engage you. I've just said that, but there's others that just want to know that you as the landlord are thinking of them and are shaping your services thinking of them. So that might not be about them doing engagement and involvement in the way we've expected, but their influence is they should be able to pinpoint that they've influenced services. If you take people here like Frances Wiley, sister of Joe Wiley, Marcus Rashford, their experiences of having learning difficulties, of school meals, they brought policy change because they just told their stories, they told their experiences. It wasn't about their data, it was about their experiences. And we've got to be more proactive in going out and finding those experiences to influence our policy design. I'm really conscious, so I'm going to run over time if I carry on talking. So I'll just take us back to one slide that I wanted to end on, which was TSMs and then just on priorities. I'm not going to talk about the TSMs. I think what we've got was a really good explanation this morning from Kate. Generally, I'm hearing people think these are all in the right ballpark. I think there's some questions around the technical side of some of the data collection. But I think we have to just keep focused when we're having the consultation, when we're giving our submissions. Will this make a tangible difference to tenants? But they're also only part of a suite of measures that need to go around this, and make sure we keep being realistic about how much the tenant satisfaction measures will achieve for tenants. Let's keep it all a huge breadth to that. I'm just going to end on just reiterating a point I mentioned earlier. We've got so many things on our to-do list, haven't we, as organisations? So many, and that's 12. There's flipping loads more, isn't there? I think the key thing is then when the regulator comes out and visits all of us when they went over the next few years, they are going to want to talk about how do you know what your tenants and communities' priorities are? How have you checked in on those? How are you measuring them? How do you know? So that's the question I want to really leave you with. How do you know what your tenants' priorities are and how are you measuring up against them? You'll need to use all the mechanisms I've talked about with that pyramid, collecting data, using insight more effectively to start to answer that question. Thanks very much. Thanks, Eamon.
No, thanks very much, Jenny, to you. Excellent and perfect timing. One question straight off in the chat from Susan Wells. says, hi, well, there are engaged residents, but not all can make meetings. IT can help, but there are barriers to sharing information between the council and tenants due to GDPR issues, etc. Any tips on how that can be overcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are issues around GDPR. We have to deal with that all the time, and I know landlords do, but there are, you can put mechanisms in place, and I think you can put protocols in place. You take the advice, you can do that. I think tenants are very, very aware about GDPR and the issues, but it should not be a barrier to listening to people, talking to people, and getting their views and experiences. I think, again, I suspect the regulator will be very sympathetic to a lot of the constraints and issues we have, but it will not be allowed to be an excuse for not doing resident engagement effectively. So yes, we can help with some of the ways not round it, but how you just deal with that. Practical, honest solutions to it, but it's not a barrier in itself.
And Jenny, I really like that point you made about, rather than you told us, we did, and flipping it around. And would you agree that it's been similar in our conversations with the regulator, for example, when they were talking about how we do the perception surveys in relation to the tenant satisfaction measures, there's a lot of freedom to landlords as to how they do those surveys. But I remember them saying, we want to see the audit trail that you've got the methodology signed off by your residents. And I think that's another example alongside the one you've given, where the landlord's got to flip things around the other way and be prepared for that bit of extra scrutiny. How did you decide 50% face-to-face and 30% online and 10% by survey? We just thought it was a good idea. No, where did the residents sign it off? That's quite a challenge, isn't it, for landlords generally, to flip things around the other way?
Absolutely, it is. And none of this is, I'm not saying any of this is going to be easy or quick. And I think that's also the point that I've been trying to land for a while. I know Fiona has. Get on with it now, because these things will take some time. I thought it was interesting. I'm probably going to get this quite wrong. I'm going to tongue tie myself in a second here. But there's been a session that some of my team were in with an organisation just very recently. And one of the things that came up was saying, residents just don't trust us. And that's the problem. People don't get involved because we've not been doing repairs well, or we've had problems, and so tenants don't trust us anymore. They don't want to get involved with us because they don't trust us. And I thought, well, what we're flipping around is saying, okay, but why don't we turn around and say, yes, but we trust you. We trust you as residents to share what your experience, to share what you're thinking, to tell us honestly about what we need to put right. And we need to work on the trust issue within our organisation, but we trust you as residents. Some way at times we've got to keep flicking everything round, and I think that this new world with the white paper is doing that to us all, to say, don't hit a barrier, flip it right round and try something a different way. I think there's some interesting points around that.
Yeah. Jenny, Susan's just followed up as well from the earlier point she made to say that, for example, Lewis Council's been using Teams very well for meetings, etc. But it's also crucial that information in reports and minutes and everything else is really accurate, and there is a flow of information between residents and their landlord, and that's all articulated and recorded.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think that's why information comms is one of the engagement standards that we put in place. And we all know. I'm telling you everything we all know. There's a balance to be struck, isn't there? I've seen too many organisations send far too much information and data to tenants, kind of submerging them in the hope that if you give them too much, then they won't ask the questions. But that happens to boards as well. Let's be clear, as board members. I'm a board member. Sometimes I get a suite of papers and I think, what am I being told here? What actually is the key issue I need to focus on here? And I think that's the same in how we present information for all of our groups. It's a proportionate amount. But I think now with the questions, certainly for me as a board member of an ALMO, now always saying, OK, yeah, this is really good, but where have I heard from residents in this policy that you're presenting to me? Not just have you consulted, but how did you consult? Who did you consult? Did you do more than just go out to, our involved stream? Did you go and actually say, well, this is a new repair strategy or whatever? Did I go and talk to people that have never had a repair? Did I go and talk to people that have done multiple repairs? Did I go and talk to people in certain different accommodations? I think all of that needs to be part of our questioning in our organisations from the future. But yeah, I think there's I think, and just picking up the sort of digital question, I think, we've been talking now for 2 years, haven't we? Isn't it great we're using digital, but we can't exclude anybody. And as we are now, I think finally going back to some kind of hybrid of face-to-face and digital. I think we just have to keep taking advantages of what digital engagement can bring us. We've all seen it, haven't we? More people involved, different times of the day, enabling people, particularly working people, to be able to join a lunchtime meeting or an evening meeting. We're seeing real changes who are coming along to kind of the involvement sessions that we're doing with organisations. Very, very different. And that's because not tenants are changing. It's because the organisation's having to say, we need to change. We need to do our meetings at different times, our meetings in different ways. Not the tenants are not. We should not require our tenants to change. We have to change as organisations.
And a very relevant comment from Sarah as well, just come through in the chat, saying information needs to be free from jargon wherever possible with no acronyms. And I think that's absolutely true. I think also, Jenny, one of the interesting things to me as well is that there's been a lot of talk about, for example, on the TSMs, that there might be gaming by landlords. They'd be trying to make themselves look good. I think people need to try and put themselves a couple of years forward, where we've got the consumer standards, we've got the ombudsman another couple of years down the road, we've got the regulator for building safety all set up. I don't think there'll be any hiding places for landlords, in the sense that if you try to game a set of figures, you'll have to publish them. There'll have to be an annual report. You'll have to put those TSMs on your website. And I think residents will see straight through it, and they'll say, that doesn't look like the performance I get on repairs. That doesn't look like how I think antisocial behaviour is understood by my landlord, and they'll be straight off to whoever it is that's got to fix it. So I think it's a good world, and it will be a good world, but it's certainly going to be one that brings challenges to landlords, doesn't it, around transparency and honesty and being very straightforward. We've gone backwards this year, and say so and explain it and say how you're going to fix it, rather than try to game it and make it look good.
I think that's absolutely right. I think, it's a trite phrase, but, people will be on the wrong side of history if they think that they can game these, or that's the starting point. How can I game these to get the figures I want? That isn't where we're going as a sector. I think the regulator, given the new resources that it's got, the kind of people it's recruited into its roles. I mean, Kate made the point, didn't it? She's been in the sector for a long time. We've all seen how it can be gamed. None of, this is not going to be the right attitude. But for me, that comes to culture. If we've got any senior teams across this country talking in that way or thinking in that way, then it's time for them to leave social housing, because that is not the right attitude. This white paper for me is so exciting, because it is about actually getting a good service for tenants across the board, and resetting that relationship. But I'm with you, Eamon. I think there's enough other stuff round here that even if somebody still managed to go for gaming, and even if they thought that was a good idea, all the other organisations that are around are putting pressure in as well. And let's not forget media. The media attention on social housing isn't going away anytime soon, nor should it. And tenants are talking to each other on social media in a way that hasn't happened before. So there is a spotlight relentlessly from different places. I think what a waste of energy to try and game figures. Far better to get on with putting the service right. I think that's a much better use of staff's energy.
Yeah. And Susan's come back, and maybe we'll take this into the final part when we look at the steps going forward for Lewes and Eastbourne. And I think Councillor Belsey touched on it as well when he said earlier, I may not know exactly what's happening on a certain estate, and I might be behind the curve. And Susan, for example, has said that there may be engagement opportunities, for example, on recycling, a council recycling service, which is actually delivered on a housing estate. Does the housing department know the council's just changed tack, or something's changed in the service delivery? So I think this openness and things being a lot more open will really provide those challenges to landlords to communicate very well through whatever media, whether it's social media, their own websites, annual reports, etc. The other one, Jenny, as well, just for myself around, is the whole thing around compliance and safety, and people feeling good in their homes. That's also going to be something landlords are going to have to be very, very honest about, aren't they? We're a little behind on electrical testing, or we're a little behind on asbestos, but this is what we're doing about it, because as I said, it'll be put to them. It'll come to their attention very quickly, won't it?
I think that's right. A couple of the slides that, because they just went out of order, I didn't come to, but you'll get them in the pack, but are around 2 other areas around engagement. So thanks for bringing that up, Eamon. I think building safety. We've put out a framework for resident engagement in building safety. So you've got your whole general engagement, if you like, going on in the landlord, but we've got that as well to think about. And let's be honest, we've got to get that right. We can't get that engagement wrong. It's too serious. It's life and death serious. So we can't just, for example, think, well, you know what, we've communicated to our residents about building safety in this block, job done. Or we put a meeting on and no one came. We've tried. No, that's not going to be good enough in terms of building safety engagement. We're going to have to try again and again. We're going to have to make sure that that information not only has been communicated and sent out, but read, and not only read, but understood, and then not only read and understood, but then acted upon. So that's a very, very different level of engagement we need to be thinking about in building safety. And then I do also think that, we've put something out around engagement with contractors. Let's be honest, again, one of the main touch points for residents is for repairs. How are we making sure that the people that go into our homes really get engagement, are maximising the opportunities when they're in there, but all in people's homes, but also when they're in people's homes, are doing the right stuff about behaving respectfully, all of those things, and doing the job right. I think, engagement is just so core to our organisations for the future. And I think picking up on those 2 areas, in particular, building safety, repairs, the people that we send into residents' homes. For too long, I think we've sent people in and not really checked how they're behaving, how they are treating residents. Are they treating them with respect? What is the culture that allows us to say it's okay to talk to residents like that? We've got to challenge all of that, haven't we?
Lovely. And a comment from Gary. We will bring Gary into the main conversation at the end there, saying that we're hoping we can look at quality rather than quantity when it comes to the KPIs as well. Traditionally, that sometimes, I think Jonathan mentioned earlier, you can get 100 KPIs in a report, but is it actually giving you reassurance around compliance and safety, for example? And if it isn't, then it's the wrong set, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jenny, would you also say, when we're talking about residents, and particularly in a local authority environment now, and how they communicate and their voice is heard with the governance, which of course is a portfolio holder, there may be a housing committee of some form, but do you still see a role for things like scrutiny panels, or a tenant champion role, or advisory groups for cabinet members or portfolio holders? That interface between the people who make the political decisions, do you see any best practice in that area? Because I think that'd be quite important going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, none of this is, again, if we go back to the principles that was mentioned at the start around, we have, consumer standards already. In that tenant and empowerment standard, involvement standard already, there are requirements on us all already to be doing scrutiny, to be reviewing our tenant engagement every 3 years. So, as a minimum, we should be doing all of that anyway. I'm a big fan of scrutiny. I think scrutiny panels, groups, in whichever way you set them up, everyone does them differently, but I think the principle of scrutiny, tenants really, really having that role, really holding the organisation to account, really suggesting new ideas. I love it, and long may it continue, scrutiny. So absolutely, when we're designing new frameworks at the moment for organisation, this is never about throwing out everything that people have got currently. If it's working well, if those relationships, if those groups are working well and producing outcomes, brilliant. Let's keep on with those. Let's build on them. I think the point that I'm trying to land definitely is it can't be the only mechanisms. And both the tenants and maybe the elected members or whoever are a part of those groups need to be thinking, yeah, this is great, but where are we getting more information from that's feeding into our decision making at this forum? What are the multiple sources of information I'm bringing in to allow us to arrive at this decision? I need some data. I need some insight from involved tenants, definitely, to help me process this, but I need people's lived real experience as well when I'm making those decisions. If we just think about it that, whatever formal structures we've got, and I'm a big fan of many of them, let's also think what's coming in. I need data, I need insight, I need lived experience. And I think that's something that we've not always done as brilliantly in the sector.
Lovely, Jenny. Well, thanks very much. I think we've gone quiet on the chat front. I can't see any raised hands. So if that's okay with you, Jenny, so big thank you to you.
Thank you.
There's lots of very positive comments in the chat. You put a human face on some difficult issues and challenges, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, all right, Jenny. Well, I'm not sure if you're able to hang around, but if not, we appreciate you made us to move on. Okay. Okay, so we're moving now to a discussion and roundup. This is the free session, as it were. I think what we're going to do is we're going to pop a poll up shortly, just to help us with some of the thoughts around this. I would welcome in particular Gary Hall, who I understand is the head of Homes First, to probably help me out, Gary, if you don't mind. Because I think what we're trying to do, Gary, is pull down some of the thoughts from this morning, and then I suppose, as always, turn it into potential actions going forward. I'm sure a number of them you've already given some thought to.
Yeah.
So just before we move to the poll, if I could just deal with a few loose ends. There were one or two questions in the chat that we weren't able to squeeze in, and to be respectful to people who made those comments, I don't want to leave them out. There's one from Peter Bowley on disrepair claims and costs, and do you have any information on that? And if I could leave that to maybe Richard and Gary to get back to Peter on that, I would say that we are seeing an increase in disrepair claims and the associated legal and repairs costs across the country, possibly partly to do with repairs backlogs, etc. There's a question from Nichelle Monique, if I've got it right, which talks about all the themes in the white paper, and will they come through in revised, for example, building regulations documents and approved documents and legislation? I think the answer is yes, but unfortunately probably all in different places. We will get some legislation, we'll have some edicts from the building safety regulator, we'll have things like the TSMs and consumer standards. So yes, there will be a lot happening, but I think the job of senior staff in particular is to pull it all together and keep everybody informed. I've also had some questions that were sent in advance, and maybe we can pick these up, some of these up in the conversation. One from Shalom Emmanuel. What impacts will all these changes have on council housing service delivery? Well, I'm hoping we'll cover that in this discussion question. Sheila Roberts. Hello, Sheila. A special hello to you. It's great to not see you, but understand you're out there. Hope to see you face to face again sometime soon. When will we resume building more social housing? So again, maybe that's a question I can leave for Gary, and we can pick that up in the conversations. And one from Debbie as well, chair of Tenants of Lewis District, saying it's essential that tenants' voices are heard and they're fully engaged in what happens next, and how will Homes First ensure that tenants remain informed and we're able to have our say in what happens next. So again, I'm sure we'll cover that in the questions there. So first question in the poll was, what's one thing that Lewes and Eastbourne councils can do to prepare for implementation of the white paper? I think we've got 23 responses in at the moment. I'm assuming Richard or someone's going to come back and let us know at some point. Don't know when you cut off the poll and we see what the answer is.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know that actually. I think we can carry on polling whilst
yeah, and then maybe Richard, if there's anything that we need to pick up, we can later.
Absolutely.
So yes, look, keep an eye on the poll, pop your thoughts in, and we'll continue the conversations here. One of the things I was going to say, Gary, if you don't mind, maybe you and I can have a sort of a conversation, and if I just open up and chip in from what we've heard this morning, I think clearly there's we've got the regulator saying you need, as landlords now, you need to have a really good understanding of the consumer standards, health and safety legislation, and the TSMs. You need to know what your residents are telling you. There's a big issue about whether or not you know enough about your tenants and your assets to be able to respond to the regulator should they come knocking. One of my thoughts there was that, and I think we're going to see more of this, that local authorities doing peer reviews or calling in third parties or independent consultants is quite a good way to help you to see if you're prepared. I think there's a huge communications exercise to be done. I think you've done really well today, starting off with so many people on the line looking at these issues within Eastbourne and Lewes. You've obviously got residents, you've got councillors, you've got tenants and leaseholders in the resident group. You've got other council departments, you've got other councillors who are not necessarily directly involved in housing provision. And just taking communication with residents alone, you need to make sure that they're clear that in this new world, what their avenues are for complaining, putting their voice forward, if they're not happy, who they go to and in what order. And at the same time, making sure that the council's approach is transparent and honest and respectful is something. Preparing for the regulator or regulators, if you've got building safety and the regulator for social housing and the ombudsman, is something I'm sure you're doing already. Governance and assurance. I think if I was a councillor on either Lewes or Eastbourne councils, I would be looking to my officers to provide me with that assurance and reassurance around not just the tenant satisfaction measures, but are we doing a good job and are we providing good quality housing management services? And is the resident voice embedded in all the decisions that we're making? We also need to keep an eye on the legislative change that are coming through, Fire Safety Order, Building Safety Act, etc. But I will finish off by saying I think there's a lot of help and tools in the box already. The Housing Ombudsman has published a complaints handling code, and generally if you're following that code you won't go too far wrong, in my view, in terms of your complaints handling processes. The regulator will publish revised consumer standards. You've got some existing standards to work to now. Make a start on those now, but be prepared for some tweaks when they're reviewed. You'll have a set of tenant satisfaction measures, which if you're doing well in those areas, you'll probably be doing well as a landlord. You'll have the legislation to follow, the examples I've given earlier. And when it comes to resident engagement, as we heard from Jenny, you've got a set of tenant engagement standards that TPAS have published, which again, if you were to adopt them, would probably put you in a good place. And of course, then you've got other support from organisations like Housemark, who can help you with your data and your insight. You've got consultants and third parties, you've got neighbours, you've got trade bodies. In your case, you've got the LGA, the Local Government Association. You've also, if you on the ALMO side, you've got the National Federation of ALMOs. So there are, I think, plenty of tools in the box, plenty of people out there who can help. It's a matter of pulling this all down into a cohesive action plan for the future. So I don't know if I want to stop at that point. And Gary, whether you wanted to come in and give any of your thoughts on this morning, or anything that I've just said, or how you think you'd move forward in your role.
I'm very grateful, Eamon, for that introduction. I don't know which one to answer first. I think for me, I'm really pleased to see so many people here today. I to my shame, on the things that we need to do response poll there, I put down staff engagement, because I think we are doing what we can. You can never do too much tenant engagement. Well, I guess you can, but we're doing a lot of tenant engagement, and we talk a lot about how we can engage more tenants. We've opened up more channels over the last 2 or 3 years. We had a new strategy in place. Undoubtedly, there's been this huge hiatus of work because of the pandemic and keeping services going. We've tried to carry on engaging with tenants. We've not done it in the way that we would like to do in some ways, and it's become a more virtual kind of world that we're in. We've always had our eye on the legislation. We've always had our eye on what's coming. But it did occur to me today, and I'm glad there's so many staff here, that we probably haven't yet, and I think today might be the start of that, done an awful lot of staff engagement around where we're going with some of these processes. So we've done some bits and bobs. We've got a value for money strategy in place, for example. Richard's team was set up as well 2.5 years ago around the customer experience, which is exactly what was described earlier, around hearing the voice of the tenant, hearing the complaints we're getting, and using those to develop services, co-production where we can. But as I say, unfortunately, what then came in the middle of all that was the pandemic, and that has undoubtedly, I think, stymied some of that work in the way that we would want to do it in that traditional sense, around sitting around a table, co-producing, and having those direct conversations. It's not stopped us completely because as the whole world has done, we've found different ways of doing that engagement. But you know, undoubtedly that's been a real challenge for us. We're hardly unique in that. So I think we kind of know what we need to do. I think this morning has confirmed some of that, and you're right, Eamon. We've got a lot of tools available to us to be able to give us some structure around the way we might do that, and I think that's really useful to know. I think we've been with bated breath around the white paper now for not far off 5 years. Grenfell, I think, was June 14th, 2017, and I think there's been a promise of legislation since September of that year. So that's taken a while. Now, obviously, what we haven't done is just sat and waited for that. We've tried to do some preparation in terms of the consumer pieces of work that we want to do, and indeed, you know, the Homes First model was all about taking place in people and making sure that we are, managing the housing services in the best, most economical, but in the most co-produced way that we can. But as I say, I've been in post 3 years. We had a good run at this for 12 months, but then the pandemic came along. But I think this now, to me, today is the start of a refresh of that piece of work, building those relationships into a more, I say, co-productive environment, and making sure that we do, get the voice of our tenants and residents. I come from a background of council housing. It's where I grew up. I've been in the in this world for 30 years in my whole career. So it's very personal to me as well that we get this right. So I expect staff to be able to come on board with that kind of direction. But as I say, I think what was interesting, I think, was that my first thought was that we need to engage the staff and get them involved in more of this co-production work. We've started doing some estates work, which I think has gone some way towards doing that and getting us back on the estates in a physical sense, which sounds very operational and practical, but it's kind of what our tenants want to do. They want to see us out there, a bit like Bobby on the beat, as we often say. But we're trying to find ways of making sure that we do that. If we see it, we sort it out sort of approach. I think it was described as something more interesting than that earlier, but that's what we want to try and do, and make sure that we are, as you say, not simply waiting for people to complain, but getting out there and being as proactive as we can. So, I welcome this. I think it gives us a good direction. I think today has been absolutely brilliant, and I thank Richard for organising it, and I thank everybody who's spoken as well. I think it's as I say, a real kind of reboot of what we want to do, and a bit of direction and structure around how we're going to do it.
Well, Gary, thanks very much. And can I, as an external party, just congratulate Lewis and Eastbourne councils and everybody today, because I really do think you're on the front foot, and I think you're to be congratulated for that. I think to hold a session like today, to bring in external parties and speakers, to get people like Kate Dodsworth on the line and hear it direct from the regulator, and Jonathan and Richard, I think you seriously are to be congratulated, because there are a lot of local authorities across the country, and I'm sure from past experience they'll all be in slightly different places, and I think we are concerned about those who are not doing the thinking you're doing now. You're thinking about those tools in the box. You're thinking about you've been very honest as well. You've just said there's an area where we need to maybe do a little bit more. Pandemic set aside, staff engagement. You're aware, and that's, I think, what the regulator, the ombudsman, that's one of the first things they want to see.
I think, Eamon, we've always, certainly since I've been here, I can't speak before that, we've always tried to be honest around what we're doing well and what we're not doing so well.
Yeah,
I think it's futile to do otherwise, and people will find you out. You won't get away with doing that for very long.
Yeah.
So I do think we are on the front foot. I didn't want to say that because
no,
it sounds complacent, and we've got a long way to go. We know what but I think we are aware that there are icebergs there, but we are trying to find ways of steering around them rather than crashing into them. So, as I say, today I think was brilliant. And again, I take no credit for this. It's utterly down to Richard that he's organised this today, and I think it seemed from the feedback again that everybody's found it a hugely engaging experience. So yeah, thank you, Richard.
Well, just another thing, Gary, you mentioned staff engagement, and I know that I mean, Kate didn't say it because she's very professional and very honest, but I think we can say it because she's offline. The regulator is a little bit concerned about I suppose the challenge of local authorities. In the sense that they're used to going into a housing association where there'll be a board, there will be a chief executive and a team, and they talk to them generally about finance and governance. They're now having to get into the nitty-gritty of consumer standards and operational frontline service delivery across all of social housing, and they're not used to coming into town halls and civic centres at all. So I know that they're even thinking about, who do I come to talk to? Do I just say they felt the need for intervention or an inspection? Do they come and talk to the council leader? Is it the portfolio holder? Do they go to whoever is the director of housing? And that director of housing may have much wider responsibilities than just housing. So I think they know that, which is one of the reasons why they're getting out, doing these road shows. They're getting out because what they'd like us to do is do their job for them. In other words, get the consumer standards, put them in place, do a good job, raise your standards, improve your tenant engagement, get those complaints processes sorted, so the regulator doesn't have to come and see you. But if they do have to come and see you, Gary, I think they are still stuck. So that leads on to communication with your elected members as well. Even if they're peripheral to the housing service, they just need to know the regulators are around. They come to them.
And we've got some elected members on today, and one of them, our housing portfolio lead, Councillor Shuttleworth in Eastbourne, has got his hand up, I think. But you're dead right, and you know, as I say, we will embrace the challenge. I'm sure. I think we've taken some steps in the right direction around the consumer work, and as I say, we built a customer experience team which is predicated around, if you like, that piece, which is not, you know, it's not everything. As I say, what we don't want to do is have a team or a few people that are they work with our tenants and nobody else does. We need to widen that, and certainly a compliance culture. You know, we recognise the importance of compliance. So you know, a big part of where we're going with this is around building those cultures, and that obviously is going to involve a partnership between everybody.
Yeah,
tenants and our wider customer base, the staff, the board, and our elected members. And I think, you know, we're pretty cognizant of that, I would hope.
Lovely. Well, maybe I can bring in Councillor Shuttleworth at this point. Can we hear from you, Councillor?
You certainly can. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
I mean, I really indicated it's been a really, really good morning, and I do thank all those who've contributed in one way or another. But one of the best things about it is, if the numbers are right on here, is we've had a very large number of people who've been involved, and all different people with different stakeholders. I'm an elected councillor, but I also have the housing portfolio as one of my duties with the Eastbourne Council. And I suppose I benefit from having regular discussions with Gary and with others in housing, so I've probably got a better perspective on some of the things that are going on. But I've learned things this morning, and I've been really grateful for the opportunity to look at all the different aspects of the white paper. It's left me with I've been making copious notes about all sorts of things and reflecting on some of the things we do and some of the things we could perhaps do better. And there's no doubt, as Gary has said himself, that in any large organisation like a local council, there are obviously ways in which we can improve on our practice. But I just wanted to jump in to say a big thank you, and the data session I thought was absolutely fascinating, and obviously engagement. I've had quite a bit to do with Richard on engagement projects, but again I can see that there are always people who slip through that net when it comes to engagement. We engage with some people, but we've got to find ways to make sure we're engaging, or everybody's having that opportunity. So yeah, thank you for a brilliant morning. Thank you for all the issues that we've touched on today, and we need to build on that going forward. Today is just the beginning, so thank you.
No, thanks very much, Councillor, and I'm sure everybody knows, but Councillor Shuttleworth is a portfolio holder for housing in Eastbourne. And I think we've also got William, who's the portfolio holder for Lewes. So William, I think you wanted to put a question or comment to us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely, William. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Councillor William Meyer. Yes, I'm the portfolio holder for Lewes. I'm not going to repeat what Councillor Shuttleworth has already very eloquently, I can put my camera on even, can't I? Very eloquently described this morning. Other than to say that, Gary, you know, you and I have a very close working relationship, as I do with Tim. It's very easy for the portfolio holders to, not to assume that everything's all right, but we have a lot of contact with officers all of the time. I mean, that's partly what our elected role is to do, is to be the interface. The problem then becomes, of course, the understanding that we are doing this and that actually we're doing this all of the time. So when Richard organised this and wrote to everyone and said, you know, he hoped that as many elected members would come. I'm not actually in the UK at the moment, but I made a special effort to make sure that that I was here this morning. And I'm very grateful I did. The presentations were excellent, and you're to be thanked actually for gathering together so many excellent people. What I would say, though, there was an interesting question somewhere in this this 3-hour session, if you can still hear me, about the construction of new homes. Is there some feedback here?
Just a little, William, but we're okay. We've got you.
Yeah, I might put the camera. Is the camera off? Can you hear me better now?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Yeah.
The whole concept of the Lewes side of things has been, as some of the staff will know, or all the staff will know, is that we've been operating a very clear process or clear understanding amongst ourselves. As I'm a Liberal Democrat councillor, but obviously I've been working with the Green councillors and with the Labour councillors and with the Independents. And one of the things that we've been able to do, of course, is to have a very unified view that we should spend as much of our time as we possibly can creating new council homes. So that was a sort of question as to when would we start building more council homes. Well, we are doing that. We're doing that in a way that hasn't been done for some many years in Lewes. They're still not the numbers I personally would like to see, you know, from a social housing perspective, but we're still a relatively small and modest council in terms of what we can achieve. And what we've achieved and what we will achieve in the 4 years that I will have been the portfolio holder is, we hope, 200 new council homes. Now, to put that in perspective, when you've got over 3,500, it doesn't sound a lot. But when you look at the perspective of the last 20 years, I can assure you that is a big number. And there's some of the officers were here earlier, and I want to pay tribute to them as well, who are working with Homes First to identify where the need is and to create those housing where we possibly can, where that need is. And I had the pleasure of even visiting a little village in our area at Plumpton only a few weeks ago, where we had six new homes that the council had been able to take on an affordable rent basis, I think 70% of market rent, and 2 shared ownership. And we were able to purchase those through a 106 agreement. So the reality is that we can and have done much, and we can, of course, with this white paper, do far more. Unlike Councillor Shuttleworth, I can't pretend that I've read it in huge detail, nor have I taken extensive notes on that. But I know that Gary has, and I know that Tim has. So I'd be relying on you to effectively provide that that insight to me, and ultimately I will provide that oversight on behalf of the council to the best as I can. So thank you very much, Richard, for organising that. I'm glad I came. Well done. And I can say to you all, actually, people like Liz, who's posted up notice about antisocial behaviour, you're doing a great job. I don't know how often you're told these things, but you are doing a great job, and you've done it through a very difficult period. And the fact that Debbie is here from Told is also a tribute to the amount of engagement that Lewes is able to achieve with its tenants. And I wish there were lots more Debbies, but at least we've got one. All right, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, William, for your comments. And you're absolutely right. We can't build enough homes as local authorities, but we're certainly having a good go. And I think last year across the country, there was something like over 7,000 homes built, which, as you said, is a huge step change from where we were 10 and 20 years ago. And I know that lots of councils are using some very innovative methods, whether it's right to buy receipts or general fund on lending or housing revenue account borrowing or looking at grants, just doing whatever they can to make it stack up and deal with issues locally. So I'll congratulate everybody for what they're doing there. I think to keep positive on these things as well, those of us who've been in housing a long time can go back to things like the Homeless Persons Act back in 1977, the Right to Buy in 1980, some of the things that they were all challenges in themselves. And I don't think we've ever been in a situation where we've had nothing to do and we've always had everything we've wanted. So we're used to working in an environment where we do our best with whatever resources we've got and would take things forward. The most important thing I think at the moment is press that reset button on quality of homes, safety of homes, involving our residents. Those are all the lessons that are coming out from Grenfell, and I think we can all do it. It will all happen. Just keeping an eye on the chat. I think lots of thank yous and some people having to go away, but also some people saying thank you to Homes First. Always looking for room for improvement, but also looking forward to the new challenges. Is one of the comments that's come in from Renee. Thank you very, very much. So yeah, I think, Richard, we've got one more poll question to come. I guess it might be on the overall session and how it's gone, but any other thoughts from anybody to put to, particularly while we've got Councillor Shuttleworth and Mayor on the line, or Gary, that you want to get across? But no pressure, because we've had a very busy morning. We're almost on time, but Richard, I think there is a poll question to come, is there?
Yes, there is. We'd just like, I mean, we're receiving quite a lot of positive feedback through the chat. Yeah. We're going to launch a poll shortly, just before you leave. It's a single question poll, so if you could just let us know what you thought of today's session. Senior leadership team are meeting this afternoon. We'll consider your feedback in terms of the first poll, and we'll share the results of that. And we'll also consider your feedback on this poll, which should be launching shortly.
Okay, Richard. Well, if that's okay with everybody, because I can't see any more hands raised. I mean, we're finishing a little early, but that's no harm. Can I just take this opportunity to give a few thank yous? As I said, just repeat that thanks to Richard, but also to everybody, Eastbourne and Lewes councils, for setting this session up today. You are definitely ahead of the game, and you're in a very good position. You're treating these issues seriously. You're contemplating what you need to do next. That's absolutely the right thing to do at this point in time. Get ahead of the curve, as they say. So thank you to Richard. Thank you also to David in the background, David Bradshaw, for keeping all the IT running, keeping the show running. We have the great benefit when we have these things that people can come in from abroad, like William, or they can come in from another part of the country. But it does mean holding the IT together and making sure that everything works. So thank you very much, David. And also thank you to our speakers, Kate and Angela, Jonathan and Jenny, experts in their own fields, trying to put it into plain language, keep away from the acronyms, keep us all posted. And thank you all for coming in and joining us today. It's fantastic that after 3 hours, we've still got the best part of 80 people on the line. I think that's something to be applauded, and thank you for joining us. So I hope you all have a very good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you.